£30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have said Stump. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 18th of July. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
COVID inquiry reports. This lunchtime we learned the dramatic conclusions of the first report from the official COVID inquiry. This hour, inquiry chair Baroness Hallett delivers her verdict on the UK's state of preparedness.
And hosting the Europeans, world leaders congregate in Buckingham Palace today as Keir Starmer hosts what's known as the European Political Community Summit. The Prime Minister wants a deal on migration, but what might it cost us?
And we're live in Milwaukee, where Donald Trump is due to speak, accepting his party's nomination for the presidency. Nigel Farage, Liz Truss and Boris Johnson are all there too. And of course, throughout today, Keir Starmer will be meeting key leaders across Europe, all at Churchill's birthplace, Buckingham Palace. He wants a deal on migration.
Yes, essentially, he wants to, although the reports are so far, that he wants some kind of returns agreement. So the EU will take some of the people who cross on small boats into this country illegally, and then in exchange, we take some people from the European Union. So it's all a little bit confusing, and I guess our question today is, would you accept such a deal? What is the benefit of it? What is the purpose even, really? Will it be like for like? So they take 10,000 small boat migrants and then we take 10,000 from the European Union? What's the point?
I suppose the argument is that if someone can be returned to France immediately, as soon as they arrive on a small boat, they, instead of being picked up and taken to Dover, they can be picked up and returned to Calais. That would be a positive thing. That might stop these boat transfers. But the cost of that might be taking just as many migrants, perhaps even more, from the pool of European migrants that currently exists. We've seen the numbers coming into Lampedusa. We've seen the numbers crossing the Mediterranean. We've seen the numbers walking through the Balkans. I mean, at what point does it become a bad deal?
Also, how many European countries have got very angry indeed about these types of exchanges and systems and asylum policies within the European Union. Last time I checked, we're not members of the European Union.
No.
So what exactly is going on here? Let us know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. Should we get the headlines with Sam Francis?
Tom, Emily, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. It's just coming up to 3 minutes past 12, and we'll start this hour with that breaking news from the COVID inquiry. We're hearing that the UK was ill-prepared for the coronavirus outbreak, with successive governments planning for the wrong type of pandemic. That's according to the first report from that COVID inquiry just out this lunchtime. Baroness Hallett says there were significant and widespread failures in her 240-page assessment, accusing the UK's emergency plans of being too complex and outdated. The report also condemns the 2011 pandemic strategy being virtually abandoned when COVID hit, with no focus on any economic or social impacts. 10 recommendations have been made, including more simple approaches to dealing with health emergencies and conducting UK-wide pandemic exercises every 3 years to prepare for any future outbreaks. At least 8 more reports will follow today's publication. Plenty more on that analysis of the report with Tom and Emily throughout this afternoon. Volodymyr Zelensky is among more than 40 European leaders meeting in Oxfordshire today, with more support being promised for Ukraine. And earlier, the Ukrainian president said when he arrived there that he's counting on Sir Keir Starmer's support.
The UK demonstrated leadership from the very beginning of Russian attacks, and all the strong steps and some not simple steps, always UK began. So I count on my meeting. I will have meeting with Prime Minister, and also bilateral one, and also I will have meeting with the government.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer is hosting that summit at Buckingham Palace, which he says he hopes will fire the starting gun on a new relationship with the EU following Brexit. The Prime Minister says he wants to reset our relationship with the continent and to push for closer security ties with other countries. The group, as I said, have already agreed on boosting defence capabilities in Ukraine as it defends itself against Russia. Meanwhile, in the US, Joe Biden has tested positive for coronavirus. The president was last seen walking off of Air Force One after cancelling a campaign speech in Las Vegas. His diagnosis comes as concerns are growing about his age, with reports that 2 top Democrats have privately questioned his re-election bid in a meeting with him. This morning, an interview's been released with Biden suggesting he would pull out of the race if medical professionals advised him to.
I made a serious mistake in the whole debate. And look, when I originally ran, you may remember it, I said I was going to be a transitional candidate. And I thought that I'd be able to move from this, just pass it on to someone else. But I didn't anticipate things getting so divided. And quite frankly, I think the only thing age brings a little bit of wisdom. And I think I've demonstrated that I know how to get things done for the country.
The families of 2 British men reported missing in Sweden are now appealing for information on their whereabouts. It's feared the men were victims of a double murder. 33-year-old Juan Cifuentes and Farouk Abdul Razak, who's 37, travelled for a business trip there but haven't come home. Officers are currently investigating after 2 bodies were found in a burnt-out car in Malmö at the weekend, with local media reporting those 2 unknown people were shot, though police, as I say, are still working to identify the victims. 1 person has died and 71 people have been rescued after a migrant boat sank in the English Channel late last night. All those on board the vessel ended up in the water, but were picked up in a joint rescue operation between the UK and French authorities. 2 prominent MPs, both of whom were former government ministers in charge of overseeing the Post Office, are being questioned at the Horizon IT inquiry today. Labour's Pat McFadden, who you can see there on screen, is currently being questioned at the inquiry. He was Postal Affairs Minister. And later, Sir Ed Davey will also take the chair to be questioned. He's now the leader of the Liberal Democrats, but also held that role in charge of the Post Office. They'll both be asked about errors in the Horizon IT system, which led to sub-postmasters being wrongly convicted of fraud. The author of an explosive report into the treatment of people taken into custody by Greater Manchester Police is calling today for urgent change. Dame Vera Baird carried out the review following reports that 3 women had accused the force of unjustified strip searches after being arrested. She says the inquiry has found that many of the arrests were unnecessary or unlawful. Greater Manchester Police has apologised and does say it accepts the recommendations of her inquiry. And an experimental drug has been found to extend the lifespan of mice by 25%, and it's thought it could also work in humans. Researchers behind the trials say the animals were injected with an antibody called IL-11. The treatment cut cancer deaths, reduced chronic inflammation and saw less muscle wasting, all key signs of ageing. And finally, before we hand back to Tom and Emily, viewers have been tuning in to get a rare peek inside the hidden world of a snake megaden in northern Colorado. But be warned, it could leave you rattled. The 2,000 rattlesnakes can now be viewed online thanks to this, as you can see there on your screen, round-the-clock webcam. Although, I have to say, they are rather tricky to spot. The elusive reptiles are nestling inside the rocky mountainside crevice, but the exact location is being kept secret to stop snake lovers or perhaps snake haters from messing with the animals. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Your next update at 12:30.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 12. And the UK COVID-19 inquiry has published its first report, laying bare the failures of the UK to properly prepare for the right kind of pandemic.
Yes, the bombshell report says the government and the civil service failed its citizens during the pandemic, leading to mass deaths and suffering. So let's dip into the inquiry where Baroness Hallett is currently speaking.
Resilient systems. This includes rationalising and streamlining the current bureaucracy and providing for better and simpler ministerial and official structures and leadership. A new approach to risk assessment that provides for a better and more comprehensive evaluation of a wider range of actual risks. A new UK-wide approach to the development of strategy, which learns lessons from the past and from regular civil emergency exercises and takes proper account of existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. Better data collection and sharing in advance of future pandemics and the commissioning of a wider range of research projects. The holding of a UK-wide pandemic response exercise at least every 3 years and the publication of the outcome. The bringing in of external expertise from outside government and the civil services to challenge orthodoxy and guard against the acute problem of groupthink. Lastly, and most importantly, the creation of a single, independent, statutory body responsible for whole system preparedness and response. It will consult widely, for example, with experts in the field of preparedness and resilience and the voluntary, community and social sector, and provide strategic advice to government. Some of the core participants have suggested I make many more recommendations than the 10 I have made. I am indebted to them for their assistance. However, the inquiry team and I have identified what I consider to be the 10 most significant recommendations, which I believe can be implemented swiftly and at a reasonable cost, and, if implemented together, could make a real difference to the preparedness and resilience of the United Kingdom. Each of the recommendations in this first report is important in its own right. But in my view, all the recommendations must be implemented in order to produce the changes that are necessary. I welcome commitments made by leading politicians to consider carefully, and I expect implement, the recommendations made by inquiries such as this one. I intend to monitor progress, and I've asked the inquiry team to liaise closely with the relevant government departments and bodies. I will expect each organisation that is responsible for implementing my recommendations to set out within 6 months how it plans to respond. I emphasise that many of the other issues of real concern to members of the public will be examined more fully in later modules of this inquiry. More reports and recommendations will follow. They include reports and recommendations relating to the core political and administrative decision-making across the United Kingdom, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the health and care systems in the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, the adequacy, supply and distribution of PPE, the use of DNA CPR notices, vaccines and therapeutics, test, trace and isolate policies, procurement, the economic response from all 4 governments, the impact on children and young people, and the impact on the population of the UK more widely. Unless the lessons are learned and fundamental change is implemented, the human and financial cost and sacrifice of the COVID-19 pandemic will have been in vain.
Some damning words there from Baroness Hallett, who has been chairing this inquiry. And the preliminary finding is that Britain prepared for the wrong pandemic.
Yes, that's very interesting indeed, isn't it? And she claims both the government and the civil service failed the public, and that there were far more deaths than there needed to be, and also the financial impact was far too high as well. She's got 10 big recommendations so far for the government that she says should all be implemented with haste. Remember, the cost of this COVID inquiry was estimated just in May to be around £196 million of taxpayer money. So I hope that these recommendations will be useful and implemented if so.
I think, if anything, this is the most important part of the inquiry. This isn't litigating anything that happened during the pandemic. This is about how prepared Britain was for the pandemic. It's the most useful thing to report, first of all, so that we can think about, actually, how do we prepare for the next pandemic? I wonder, however, if the future parts that go over individual ministerial decisions and what was happening during the rather chaotic period of 3 different lockdowns and various tiers of restrictions, whether that will be perhaps more heat than light.
Gosh, yes. Remember all the endless conversations and quizzing over WhatsApp messages, who said what when, who was rude to who was nasty to who was upset by whom. They're interesting. Just a couple of the recommendations, just to give you a taste of what she's saying. She wants a radical simplification of the civil emergency preparedness and resilience systems, better systems of data collection, sharing in advance of future pandemics, a UK-wide pandemic response exercise every 3 years at least. So that recommendation that we should be having sort of practices every 3 years, just in case.
Not involving you and me, hopefully just within government as they do war games and the such. But our very own Mark White has been there at the inquiry. As you can see, they've just concluded the report. He's currently dashing back to the studio and will give us all the internal detail.
He will indeed, and I'm interested to know from you at home whether you think this is an important exercise, this inquiry. Do you have hope that they will find things and implement recommendations as they should? Just let us know your thoughts. Perhaps you think it's a waste of taxpayers' money. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch. But coming up, we're going to be live at Buckingham Palace.
Yes, taking his first steps to reset relationship with Europe, Keir Starmer is meeting with international leaders. But what will those meetings entail? This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In World War I, 309 men from Britain and the Commonwealth never came home because they'd been shot at dawn. The majority were killed for desertion, cowardice and sleeping at post. Appearing at their court-martials and told they'd brought shame on their country, these men had no opportunity to defend themselves and were executed by a firing squad. The National Memorial Arboretum launched a fundraising campaign to restore the memorial, which has stood for more than 20 years.
Thank you to your viewers for their support for the fundraising campaign, and thanks to the generosity of so many people, we've been able to replace all 309 of the posts that represent those young men that were shot in the First World War. Restoration of this really precious memorial.
The centrepiece of the memorial is the young soldier, blindfolded and facing his execution. In September 1916, Private Harry Farr was ordered to the front. Already suffering from shell shock, he was overwhelmed and refused his orders. He was court-martialed, and in a trial lasting only 20 minutes, he was sentenced to death. On the day of his execution, he faced the firing squad without a blindfold. Janet Booth is Private Farr's granddaughter and was part of the public campaign to have those who were shot at dawn officially pardoned.
When I asked my gran, do you know where I could find Harry's grave? And she looked at my mother, and there was this sort of look between them, and then she said, well, he hasn't got a grave because they didn't warrant, he deserved one because he was shot as a coward and had let his country down. We can come here as a family and pay our respects to him, and also for all the other families, it's somewhere to come and remember their loved ones.
The People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 20 minutes past 12, and the Prime Minister says he's taking his first steps in resetting the UK's relationship with Europe.
Well, he's hosting the European Political Community Summit at Churchill's birthplace of Blenheim Palace, with around 50 European leaders in attendance. The Prime Minister is set to offer a lead in the continent's fight against illegal migration. At least that's what he hopes.
Yes, our political correspondent Catherine Forster is at the summit at Blenheim Palace. Catherine, thank you very much. What a beautiful setting for such a congregation, for such a meeting. What exactly has been spoken about so far, and what's all this about a potential migration deal?
Yes, good afternoon, Tom and Emily. It's incredible, isn't it? The timing of the general election. It's enabled Sir Keir Starmer, after 1 week as Prime Minister, to go to the NATO summit in Washington, and 1 week on from that, to host 45 European leaders here in this incredible setting of Blenheim Palace. So this morning, we've seen the leaders' photograph, and we've seen Sir Keir Starmer kick this all off with a speech in which he said, under my leadership, Britain will be a friend and partner ready to work with you. Not part of the European Union, but very much part of Europe. And I think that's key because, of course, this meeting here, it's not just members of the EU, it's members of the whole of Europe, excepting Russia and Belarus, of course. So the first priority was to reassure Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine and send a message to Russia and I suspect to Donald Trump, if he should be incoming as president, that Europe remains committed to supporting Ukraine. We heard Zelensky speaking about that as well. Of course, he is asking for more support and more support now, but also the matter of illegal migration. Now, the agenda for this was set by Rishi Sunak, but Sir Keir Starmer is very happy to pick this up. Sure, he's dropped the Rwanda plan. He says it was a gimmick. He said under no circumstances are we going to be leaving the ECHR, but he is very keen to work with Europe to try to tackle the Channel migrants. And of course he will have to, won't he? Because without leaving the ECHR, without Rwanda, they have only the option of trying to stop people from getting to us in the first place. So he really wants a new security cooperation. He really wants UK to be part of the fingerprinting system that the EU has. That would mean that people arriving, they would instantly have intelligence on them. Also returns agreements with safe countries. David Lammy is working on that. So Keir Starmer will be talking with Emmanuel Macron later. There may be some new movement on the deal with France, a possibility maybe of us taking some asylum seekers, but potentially children with links to the UK. Something there, maybe we will have to see. But ultimately what Sir Keir Starmer wants is a returns agreement with the EU. Well, there is no prospect of that happening right now or indeed in the very near future. Apart from anything else, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, is not here. She is trying very hard to get re-elected for another term. So big ambitions from Sir Keir Starmer. He's hoping that because this is a new government, that they weren't involved in Brexit, that their hands are clean of that, so to speak, that the EU and other European countries will be more minded to listen and perhaps give them what they want. But I imagine there will be a price extracted. You don't get something for nothing.
Never, never, ever something for nothing. Well, Catherine Forster, I'm hoping you're enjoying the glorious day, the marvellous setting. What a gift for Keir Starmer to have just been handed this summit on a platter in his second week as Prime Minister. Catherine Forster, thank you so much for joining us there live from Buckingham Palace.
Decent timing, isn't it? First week on the job, your NATO summit, you've got your Blenheim Palace summit. It's all rather lovely.
You get to welcome 45 different European leaders one by one into the most marvellous palace. I think it's the grandest palace in the United Kingdom, actually.
And on such a glorious day. That doesn't happen so often here, does it?
He's a very lucky general, is Keir Starmer.
Very lucky indeed. But all this talk of resetting our relationship with the European Union, I wonder if that's code word for I don't know, something more. Anyway, in other migration-related news, Labour will fast-track plans to allow 90,000 migrants earmarked for deportation to Rwanda, previously, to claim asylum in the United Kingdom.
Well, the new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is expected to announce the legislation as soon as this week. It will kickstart the process for thousands of people who had feared they could be removed from the UK to actually claim asylum here in the UK.
Well, joining us now is Henry Bolton, international security and border control expert. Henry, these 90,000 people who have presumably entered this country illegally, now, under the new government, may well have their asylum claims processed. The Conservatives have said this is essentially an amnesty. What do you make of it?
The Conservatives are partly right. Under legislation that the Conservative government brought in, people who were crossing the Channel since June last year were ineligible to claim asylum. So they've been coming in, and of course nothing's been sort of holding them back or deterring them. Rwanda didn't deter them, not to any particular extent anyway. So we've got this continual, still ongoing movement across the Channel of people who then can't claim asylum in this country. But what do you do with them? There are three things that you can do with them. You can either return them to whence they came, or you can detain them somewhere, or you can grant them asylum. You've really got those three choices. Now, Rwanda was a way of solving part of that problem, because you can't return people to Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, and places with which we have no formal contacts with the governments, and we have no access to those countries in order to return people there. So what do you do with them? Well, an answer would be to send them to Rwanda. Well, that's a closed option now. That's not going to happen. So what do you do with them all? Now, this is something that I believe, and I flagged it at the time, if you are going to pass such legislation as the Conservatives did, then you need to immediately have in place the return agreements and the whatever other operational responses you're going to have to deal with the people that now can't claim asylum. Well, they didn't do that. So here we are with 90,000 people plus in the UK who are in limbo. The Labour government has to do something with them. Now, as I understand it, their priority is going to be to process the asylum claims from countries for people who have come from safe countries, widely regarded as safe, so places like Vietnam. Which means that then they can be returned to those countries, their asylum claims can be denied, and they can be returned to those countries. But the majority of them are probably going to be granted asylum because it's too difficult and too time-consuming to process their claims in a proper sort of...
Yes, just on that, Henry, the Refugee Council gave an estimate, and they seem to think that about 70% would be granted asylum.
I think that's probably fair. I think that's probably about right. There are two reasons why you need to grant them asylum. They come from countries that we can't return them to anyway, as I've said just now, or to properly and fully investigate their asylum claims. We simply don't have the means, or it's a very, very lengthy process to do it. And of course, all the time, we've got more and more boats arriving. So then you get rid of 10,000 in whatever way, you deal with them, and by then you've got another 10,000 across the channel. So you've got to somehow get ahead of the game. So I understand why the Labour government is doing this. It's a shame, I think, in that respect, that they've closed off the Rwanda option, because that would have dealt with some of them. And so, in effect, yes, a lot of these are going to be effectively amnestied. And in a sense, I understand that. I appreciate it. And it's a pragmatic response, but only if you're going to also stop the flow coming across the channel. And I think these talks that you've just referred to in Buckingham Palace, part of that is going to be exploratory. What is the art of the possible? Keir Starmer, this is his first real opportunity for him and others in the government and their staff to engage with other European countries and countries from elsewhere. I noticed that the president of Albania was present, and that we've already got an agreement with them. But I suspect he was front and centre of those photographs because the Prime Minister wants to hold him up as an example of what sort of agreements can be made to work with other countries, some of those other leaders there that at the moment aren't taking people back.
Yes, so, we're looking at the Albanian Prime Minister stood next to Keir Starmer now on our screens. Of course, that's a legacy agreement Rishi Sunak struck. It did reduce the number of Albanians coming to the UK by more than 90%.
Indeed. And if Keir Starmer can sort of utilise the presence of the Albanian team at Buckingham Palace to encourage other countries to do likewise, then he might be that 70% that we talked about might be reduced slightly as we can return other people. And there might be, I'm sure there are discussions going on as to how we might be able to do a sort of Rwanda-type sort of deal with somebody else who, for example, a country that is a member of the Council of Europe, perhaps even Albania, to return people there if they're from Afghanistan or somewhere else. It's exploratory. I'm sure Keir Starmer has got some sort of ideas of the sort that I've talked about. But these talks now are exploratory. There's no clear plan. There's no clear way ahead at the moment. And so
not sure Henry, Albania would agree to that, would they?
Well, you don't know. Albania has already indicated to Italy, for example, that they will take some people. They will take some people from Italy. So these are conversations. I mean, I've participated in conversations like these, discussions like these in other regions of the world. You get together with people behind closed doors with a lot of coffee, and you discuss the art of the possible. What would you be prepared to do? What would it take to do a deal? These are informal, in a sense, some of these conversations, but they then gradually take form and become more solid. And I think, going forward, again, Labour's idea of a border security command, again, I treat it with caution, But I have always said that as well as dealing with the push factors, the pull factors, and dealing with the processing of people once they get here, you have to address the facilitation and encouragement of movement between A and B, between the point of origin and the UK. And that's normally criminal. And so I welcome the fact that they are going to do this, but it has to go beyond Europe. It has to, because otherwise, once they're in Europe, then the Europeans have got the same problem that we've got. We've got a problem altogether. So I broadly welcome this, but the success or otherwise is going to be in the detail.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much, Henry Bolton, international security and border control expert. Yes, of course, it's not just a Europe-wide problem. It's a global problem, really, the mass movement of people.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we're going to get a deal done today, but those conversations perhaps beginning.
Exploratory conversations, exploratory discussions. Anyway, coming up, we're going to be crossing over live to Milwaukee ahead of Donald Trump's acceptance speech for the Republican nomination for presidency. This is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just after 12:30 and the top story today. The first report from the COVID inquiry has found that all 4 UK nations were failed by a lack of process, of policy and of planning for a pandemic. The 240-page document reveals the government made serious errors and there were significant flaws in how the outbreak was dealt with in 2020. It also found the measures in place were outdated and complex. Baroness Hallett has now made 10 recommendations to avoid a repeat of what she's described as those fatal flaws in any future health emergency. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to use a summit of European leaders to push for joint action on illegal migration. The Prime Minister's hosting around 45 foreign leaders at Buckingham Palace in Oxfordshire, where defence, security and energy are on the agenda. Earlier, he used his opening speech there to reaffirm the UK's support for Ukraine, saying the threat from Russia reaches right across Europe. In another blow to Joe Biden's efforts to get re-elected as US president, he's now contracted coronavirus, forcing him to pull out of a campaign speech. The White House says the 81-year-old is having mild symptoms from the infection, but he's vaccinated, boosted and isolating, they say, while he continues his duties. It comes as the US president's facing growing pressure to step aside because of his age, with reports today that 2 top Democrats in Congress have met him privately to express their concerns over his re-election bid. A football club in Hertfordshire has paid tribute to one of the British men who's gone missing in Sweden. Juan Cifuentes used to play for Welland Garden City before disappearing alongside Farouk Abdul-Razak. Their families are appealing for information on their whereabouts, amid fears the men might have been victims of a double murder. Here, Greater Manchester Police is now promising to take action following a report that's discovered officers are abusing their power. Dame Vera Baird carried out the review following reports that 3 women had accused the force of unjustified strip searches after being arrested. She says the inquiry found those arrests were unnecessary or unlawful. And finally, banks have been told to improve how they treat political figures following a review into so-called debanking. The UK's financial watchdog found most firms could deal with MPs better, so they're not subject to excessive checks or bans. The issue of debanking made headlines when Nigel Farage claimed he had his account closed because of his political views. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. More at 1 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, very good day to you. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. For many, there is going to be plenty of fine sunny weather around as we go through the rest of today and feeling pretty hot at times too, but towards the northwest of the UK, there is a system here pushing its way in and this is bringing quite a bit of cloud across many parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland and some rain too, especially across western Scotland and also parts of Northern Ireland as well. Further east, a bit drier here and across much of England and Wales, it's a fine picture. 1 or 2 showers may develop, but I think on the whole we're going to stay dry with plenty of sunshine, and with that feeling markedly hotter than it has done recently. Temperatures getting to highs of around 28 Celsius. Cooler towards the northwest though, and here it is going to stay pretty cloudy as we go through this evening. Further rain to come, especially across western parts of Scotland. In the east around Aberdeenshire we may get some brightness breaking through, but on the whole a largely cloudy picture for much of Scotland and across Northern Ireland too, with further outbreaks of rain as we go through the evening. But sticking with the fine sunny weather for many parts of England and Wales, lots of late sunshine to look forward to, and with those high temperatures during the daytime it is going to be a warm evening as well. The cloud and the rain across northern parts does continue for a little bit of time, but I'm expecting the rain to ease a bit overnight, so it really just be over higher ground where we're going to see much if any rain overnight, most places otherwise turning dry. Clearer skies across parts of England and Wales, though there could be some mist and fog patches developing in the west. It is going to be a warm night, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, could be uncomfortable for sleeping for some of us. Then through tomorrow, still quite cloudy across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, though a bit brighter than today, and there will be a bit of rain pushing in towards the Outer Hebrides later on. Otherwise it's looking mostly dry, apart from 1 or 2 showers perhaps, and plenty of sunshine yet again, and with that temperatures are going to be even higher than today, likely to get in the low 30s towards the southeast.
The latest GB News travel.
On the southbound side of the M5, there are long delays and a partial block due to recovery work that's continuing following an accident this morning from the M6 at Junction 8 to Junction 1 for West Bromwich and Birmingham. Delays just before the M6 at Junction 10 for Wolverhampton and Walsall. There's also delays north before Junction 7 for Great Barr, and it's queuing on the M5 north as traffic passes the scene. London bound on the M2, slow traffic to a broken down vehicle from 6 through to Junction 5 for the Stockbridge roundabout. It's slow for Bedfordshire and the southbound side of the M1 through the roadwork area just before Junction 11 for Dunstable South and Luton. And the M1 has severe delays to an earlier police incident from Junctions 10 for Luton Airport Spur Road through to Junction 9. That's your very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 38 minutes past 12.
Yes, and tonight Donald Trump is expected to speak for the first time since he was shot at that rally as he accepts the Republican nomination for presidency.
He plans to build on his running mate J.D. Vance's vow to champion the forgotten Americans, which was the central theme being to kickstart a golden age and make America great once again. They've changed the slogan, not make America great again, make America great once again. So
I guess, makes sense logically. Let's go across to Ray Addison, who's in Milwaukee for us. Ray, fantastic stuff that you're there at the convention. Tell us, what's up?
Well, welcome to you both to the Fiserv Forum here in Milwaukee. It's home, as you've been saying, to the Republican National Convention, and in just a few short hours this hall will be absolutely packed with thousands of party members here for the fourth and final day of this event. And now this venue usually hosts huge sporting events, pop concerts as well. In fact, if you hang around till August, you'll be able to see Barry Manilow. But tonight there's only one person that people want to see, and that is Donald Trump making his keynote speech and accepting his presidential nomination. Now, he's supposed to be arriving around 8 o'clock Central Time in the US. That would be around 2 a.m. UK time. However, we know with Donald Trump, he's often makes the audience wait to build up that anticipation, and so it could be much later into the morning in the UK. Over the seen a bandaged Donald Trump here at the convention. He's been listening to speaker after speaker sing his praises, and last night the main event was J.D. Vance. That is the Iowa senator and of course Donald Trump's vice presidential pick as his running mate. And Vance spoke very passionately about hope last night, and he also said that if Donald Trump had not turned his head head at that split second, then a would-be assassin could have killed him, and this in fact could be a major day of mourning for the Republican Party. Of course, that brush with death just 5 days ago has eliminated any final doubt that many Republicans had over Donald Trump being their presidential candidate, and in fact some have seen it as a sign from God himself that he is being protected and, even if I could use the word, endorsed to run for president. Donald Trump himself said after that event that he had ripped up the original speech that he's written for this evening, and he wanted to unite America. He's gone for a more conciliatory approach for this evening. However, since then, Joe Biden has once again gone on the attack, using that rhetoric that we've been hearing about how Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. And so with that change, will Donald Trump actually rip up the second speech and go back to plan A? Maybe he'll go back on the attack. I spoke to some people here attending the convention, and I asked them, what do you want to hear from Donald Trump tonight?
What he wants to do to make America great again. You know, I do think after this assassination attempt that he's going to try to be a little more unifying.
It's called veritatis splendor in Latin, the splendor of truth.
Yes.
Hoorah!
We're going to get some truth from him.
These lying punks. I'm really hoping that he reaches out across the aisle and talks to everybody.
Look, I'm super pumped. I can't wait to hear his speech, and I think it'll be even more emotional.
Now, Ray, I've noticed a trend at this convention. It seems that Donald Trump is starting a bit of a fashion trend. Lots of people taking to aping his earwear.
Yeah, absolutely, and we've been seeing that around the convention centre over the last few hours that we've been here, and we're going to bring you some shots of those later and speak to some people. But this is a hugely colourful and vibrant event. There is people, obviously, from all over the United States and the territories too, and they are incredibly passionate. And if nothing is more true than what we've discovered, certainly through this would-be assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, it has united the party around Donald Trump, and there's a real sense of excitement and urgency. Those words that we saw him say when he stood up after being shot and he pumped his fist in the air and he said, "Fight, fight, fight." That has become a rallying cry here at the convention, and party members break out into it, into chants of that as often as they can, just as often as you might usually hear them say USA, USA. And so there is a lot of passion and a lot of excitement about Donald Trump's speech here this evening.
And Ray, of course, Joe Biden himself is not only coming out on the attack, it seems like he's been a little bit attacked. He's under the weather right now, suffering from COVID, and it's led a lot of people on the Hill to suggest his suitability is now back in the frame.
Yeah, absolutely. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump took a little bit of the heat off of Joe Biden, if you will, because the focus came off of that media narrative of when will he pull out, will he pull out. However, by Joe Biden withdrawing from that speech that he was supposed to make in Las Vegas yesterday, our time, it's really put the focus on him. Obviously, he's been diagnosed with COVID. That's what we're hearing, although a lot of people that I've been speaking to here at the convention rather doubtful whether that is the real reason. And we understand there's been fresh reporting that this incident is making or giving Joe Biden the opportunity to think about his options and maybe listen a little bit more carefully to some of those voices that want him to go. And we are seeing an increasing number of senior Democrats who want him to back out.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ray. You've got a big day ahead of you for us in Milwaukee. Thank you very much, Ray Addison, there at the convention.
Speaking at what must be about 6 in the morning.
So funny, isn't it? Yeah. Make ear bandages great again. Cool again. There's so much merchandise already about the attempted assassination. T-shirts, hats,
I've seen
bandages.
some fairly distasteful key rings that have been being sold that have a hole in the ear of a cutout of Donald Trump that you can put your keys on. Anyway.
Are they pro-Donald Trump?
I think they are pro-Donald Trump.
OK. Oh, well, that's fine then.
Yeah.
He'd laugh, wouldn't he?
I think he'd probably laugh.
He'd probably laugh. Anyway, the UK COVID-19 inquiry has published its first report today. It lays bare the failures of the UK to properly prepare for a pandemic.
Well, the bombshell report says the government and the civil service failed its citizens during the pandemic, leading to mass deaths and suffering.
Well, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is there for us now. Mark, tell us, what were the key things that came out of that report?
Well, there's no doubt that this first module report from the COVID inquiry, another 9 to go after this, is deeply damning of the way in which the UK government and indeed the devolved governments as well prepared for the possibility of a global pandemic. According to Baroness Hallett, chair of this inquiry, they were too fixated on an influenza-type virus and didn't pay enough attention to what was emerging in Asia and the Middle East in terms of coronavirus outbreaks there. And even so, the pandemic resilience plan that they had, the 2011 plan, just was not robust in any way, shape or form. It didn't survive, according to the report, first contact with this virus. It was effectively abandoned as soon as the pandemic really started to grip the UK. And of course we know 235,000 people died with symptoms related to COVID-19 as of the end of last year. It caused untold damage to the economy, and it is the belief of Baroness Hallett that had actually there been a more robust pandemic plan in place at the time, and it might well have prevented some of the economic damage and the loss of life that occurred as a result of COVID-19.
It is fascinating to see that the initial finding is that there were some plans, as you mentioned, that 2011 set of preparations, but for flu rather than for COVID or some sort of SARS-style illness. And perhaps that's the reason why we kept the borders open for quite so long, while East Asian countries shut down their borders and kept the virus out for longer. In many ways, the government was following the plan to the letter. It's just it was the wrong plan.
Yes, a plan, as I say, that just didn't survive first contact in battle, as it were. Baroness Hallett, in her inquiry, is very scathing of the institutions that were in place to oversee the implementation of the pandemic plan. She said that they were labyrinthine in their complexity. And she has come up with 10 recommendations as well that she wants to see acted upon, recommendations that she believes will help in future if they are properly acted on, and there is investment in pandemic preparedness, so the likes of regular exercises at least 3 times a year, paying attention to those exercises, having a view to what is happening around the world and not being so focused on groupthink, on a particular potential for a pandemic, when of course there are lots of potential avenues that a pandemic could take. So it's been welcomed by the families of some of those who died from COVID-19 already. They want to see it going much further, and it will, because of course this is just the first, as I said, the first report of some 9 other modules that are to follow that will look at the way, for instance, the next one, at the way in which the government and its ministers responded to the pandemic as it was growing in intensity, and the decisions that those individual ministers made, for better or worse.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, outside that COVID inquiry. Thank you very much.
Yeah, deeply ironic that in 2019, just a couple of years, just 1 year before the pandemic, the Global Health Security Index ranked the UK as best in the world prepared for a pandemic because we had this flu-style plan. And that flu-style plan discouraged closing borders, said you should continue travel, said you should continue all sorts of balmy things that don't really make any sense if you're dealing with a coronavirus. But all ministers were thinking, my goodness me, we're so well prepared. All of these international experts are ranking us so well.
Perhaps there isn't a perfect blueprint. But to finish the hour, this is a bit curious. A council worker has been sacked after protesting about the use of his pronouns on his email signature. He didn't want to.
Well, James Orwin changed his email footer to XY chromosome guy and adult human male rather than he, him. Well, he's...
He said the only way to challenge the company policy was to adopt deliberately provocative pronouns.
Well, joining us now is human rights activist Miranda Yardley. Miranda, it seems that this individual was clearly sort of trying to launch a protest in his own way against the use of mandatory pronouns in email signatures. Should he really have lost his job?
Well, having just read through the 63-page judgment of the Employment Tribunal, which was fun, I have to say, very interesting. There's a lot more to this than you would think at first blush. One issue, I think, which is worth mentioning is that the claimant represented himself, which is never a good idea. There's an adage about lawyers that a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. And these types of procedures are very much process thick, and understandings of the law can be very different to how you would perceive it. The second thing that I would bring up as well, that this is a decision only in the first tier tribunal, and if this went to appeal, as happened in the Forstater case, it could lead to a precedent that would be binding, which I think would be a interesting outcome. Now, turning to the facts of what's happening within the case, by the tribunal decision, the really good bits to look at are paragraphs 298 to 301, which set out the reasons for, or the reasoning behind the wrongful dismissal decision for gross misconduct. It would appear that the claimant had done what he'd done and put this message within his bio, within his pronoun space of his bio, and he was asked to remove it, and he's refused to remove it. And it was on that the tribunal decided that he had not acted in accordance with reasonable instructions of his employer, which was to remove what he put within the signature, and so he repudiated his contract of employment by those actions. Now, all of that said, I'd like to say that I do not agree with public associations or local authorities, for example, publicly owned bodies, nor I would say with corporations imposing a belief system on people whereby they would have to put their pronouns in their bio or their email signature. So I think that this particular case is quite misunderstood. And if we look at the facts of the case, I think that there is an interesting and worthwhile discussion to be had here.
It's quite amazing how quickly this has become the norm, though, in businesses, in local authorities, public bodies, that you're all invited to put your pronouns. I mean, this is very new. This is very new, yet it's somehow everywhere now. And I can imagine a lot of employees find it extremely irritating and feel a pressure to do it, even if it's not specifically mandatory.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the pronouns in bio thing was not mandatory, and I think we can only analyse this case, the ramifications of it, if we look at the facts. And I would say to anybody that is interested in learning more about this and understanding what is actually going on to read the judgment. But it's like you say, this has happened very, very quickly. I don't think that this type of action does anything for people who consider themselves to be somewhat, how would I put it, gender variant. And I think it is a form of coercive behaviour that is undemocratic and attacks people's free speech. And like you say, it's all happened very quickly. I mean, ironically, we're talking about a social meme just after talking about a virus attack which knocked out the world for a year or so, a few years ago. I mean, ideas have got no boundaries. Bad ideas have no boundaries, and the correct response, I think, to bad ideas is to replace them with better ideas.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Miranda Yardley, human rights activist. Good to get your perspective on all this. It would annoy me if I was told to put my pronouns in my bio. Say, you know I'm a woman. Just stop. Anyway.
No, I don't think... I don't think either of us have pronouns in our bios. Well, next hour we're going to be much back at
£30,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours. It's our biggest cash prize of the year so far, and you could be getting that winning call from us to tell you that you're our next Great British Giveaway winner.
Oh, I can't believe this.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
That is absolutely fantastic.
We're over the moon.
I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh, it shocks me. I never won a penny in my life.
If I was there, I'd buy you a drink.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In World War I, 309 men from Britain and the Commonwealth never came home because they'd been shot at dawn. The majority were killed for desertion, cowardice and sleeping at post. Appearing at their court-martials and told they'd brought shame on their country, these men had no opportunity to defend themselves and were executed by a firing squad. The National Memorial Arboretum launched a fundraising campaign to restore the memorial, which has stood for more than 20 years.
Thank you to your viewers for their support for the fundraising campaign, and thanks to the generosity of so many people, we've been able to replace all 309 of the posts that represent those young men that were shot in the First World War. Restoration of this really precious memorial.
The centrepiece of the memorial is the young soldier, blindfolded and facing his execution. In September 1916, Private Harry Farr was ordered to the front. Already suffering from shell shock, he was overwhelmed and refused his orders. He was court-martialed, and in a trial lasting only 20 minutes, he was sentenced to death. On the day of his execution, he faced the firing squad without a blindfold. Janet Booth is Private Farr's granddaughter and was part of the public campaign to have those who were shot at dawn officially pardoned.
When I asked my gran, do you know where I could find Harry's grave? And she looked at my mother, and there was this sort of look between them, and then she said, well, he hasn't got a grave because they didn't warrant, he deserved one because he was shot as a coward and had let his country down. We can come here as a family and pay our respects to him, and also for all the other families, it's somewhere to come and remember their loved ones.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 18th of July. I'm Emily Carter.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
The COVID inquiry reports. This lunchtime, we learn the dramatic conclusions of the first report from the official COVID inquiry. This hour, inquiry chair Baroness Hallett delivers her verdict on the state of UK preparedness.
Hosting the Europeans. World leaders congregate in Buckingham Palace today as Keir Starmer hosts what's known as the European Political Community Summit. These are the very latest pictures as Sir Keir Starmer commences his talks on how to end the illegal migration crisis in Europe.
And we're live in Milwaukee, where Donald Trump is due to speak, accepting his party's nomination for the presidency. Nigel Farage, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, they're all there too.
We were looking at pictures there of Keir Starmer with the Albanian Prime Minister at the European Political Community Summit in Buckingham Palace. Really interesting that these are two men who are having such frank conversations so early on. Of course, Albania is the one country in Europe we do have a returns deal with.
Yeah, could he capitalise on that relationship that Rishi Sunak helped build, sending back illegal migrants to Albania, that lowered the numbers of Albanians coming here significantly, 90%? Around that. So I'm sure Keir Starmer wants to build on that relationship. Could it be, as Henry Bolton mentioned earlier, we had him on to talk about this, mentioned that perhaps Albania could be a country that would do a Rwanda-style scheme with us?
A safe third country. Although, I don't think Albania can take all of the migrants in Europe.
It's a small country.
Ultimately, we're going to have to strike more returns agreements. The thing is, Albania can agree to a returns agreement with the UK. We just chuck them a little bit of money. Now, we've been chucking rather a lot of money at France, and they have still refused to do any sort of returns agreement. What they want is a two-way returns agreement, not just done with France, but done with the whole European Union, so that Britain takes a share of all of the migrants in Europe. I don't know if the average voter would much like Keir Starmer signing up to something like that.
Also, would it even stop the boats? I mean, would it? I mean, if you're going to come illegally, won't you continue to, regardless? I don't know. Let us know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. Is Keir Starmer onto something, or will there be a massive catch to all of this talk about a returns agreement? gbnews.com/your say. Shall we get the headlines with Sam Francis?
Very good afternoon to you. It's exactly 3 minutes past 1 and the top story this lunchtime. Sir Keir Starmer says today's report from the COVID inquiry does indeed confirm the UK was unprepared, he says, for the coronavirus outbreak. In the 240-page assessment released this lunchtime, Baroness Hallett found there were significant and widespread failures from successive governments. The report also condemns the 2011 pandemic strategy for being virtually abandoned when COVID hit, with no focus on economic or social impacts. 10 recommendations have been made, including a more simple approach to dealing with health emergencies and conducting UK-wide pandemic exercises every 3 years. The Prime Minister has said his government are committed to learning from the inquiry, as he expressed his heartfelt sympathies to those who have lost loved ones during the pandemic. Volodymyr Zelensky is among more than 40 European leaders meeting in Oxfordshire today, with more support being promised for Ukraine. Earlier, the Ukrainian president said he is counting on Sir Keir Starmer's support.
The UK demonstrated leadership from the very beginning of Russian attacks, and all the strong steps and some not simple steps, always UK began. So I count on my meeting. I will have meeting with Prime Minister, and also bilateral one, and also I will have meeting with the government.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer is hosting that summit at Buckingham Palace, which he hopes will fire the starting gun on a new relationship with the EU following Brexit. The Prime Minister says he wants to reset our relationship with the continent and to push for closer security ties with other countries. The group have already agreed on boosting defence capabilities in Ukraine as it defends itself against Russia. In the US, Joe Biden has tested positive for coronavirus. The president was last seen walking off of Air Force One after cancelling a campaign speech in Las Vegas last night. Biden's diagnosis comes as concerns are growing about his age, with reports that top Democrats have questioned his re-election bid in private meetings with him. This morning, an interview has been released, with Biden suggesting he would pull out of the election race if medical professionals advised him to.
I made a serious mistake in the whole debate. And look, when I originally ran, you may remember it, I said I was going to be a transitional candidate. And I thought that I'd be able to move from this, just pass it on to someone else. But I didn't anticipate things getting so divided. And quite frankly, I think the only thing age brings is a little bit of wisdom. And I think I've demonstrated that I know how to get things done for the country.
The families of two British men who were reported missing in Sweden are appealing for information on their whereabouts. It's feared the men were victims of a double murder. 33-year-old Juan Cifuentes and Farouk Abdul Razak, who's 37, travelled for a business trip there but haven't come home. Officers in Sweden are investigating after two bodies were found in a burnt-out car on Sunday. Local media in the area of Malmö are reporting those bodies were shot, though police are still working to identify the victims. One person has died and 71 people have been rescued after a migrant boat sank in the English Channel late last night. All of those on board the vessel ended up in the water, but were picked up in a joint rescue operation between French and UK authorities. Two prominent MPs, both of whom were former government ministers overseeing the Post Office, are being questioned today at the Horizon IT inquiry. Labour's Pat McFadden was Postal Affairs Minister. Sir Ed Davey, now the leader of Liberal Democrats, also held that role. While at the inquiry, they will be asked about errors in the Horizon IT system, which of course led to sub-postmasters being wrongly convicted of fraud. The author of an explosive report into the treatment of people taken into custody by Greater Manchester Police is now calling for urgent change. Dame Vera Baird carried out the review following reports that 3 women had accused the force of unjustified strip searches after being arrested. She says the inquiry found many of those arrests were unnecessary or unlawful. Well, Greater Manchester Police has apologised and says it does accept the recommendations of the inquiry. And an experimental drug has been found to extend the lifespan of mice by 25%, and it's thought it could even work in humans. Researchers behind the trials say the animals were injected with an antibody called IL-11. The treatment cut cancer deaths, reduced chronic inflammation and saw less muscle wasting, all key signs of ageing. And just a quick breaking line for you before we hand back to Tom and Emily. We are hearing this afternoon that Andrew Malkinson, who was wrongly convicted of rape and jailed for 17 years, was failed by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and they say he could have been exonerated almost a decade earlier. That review finding just into us in the last few minutes. The CCRC are saying that he obstructed his fight for justice and it cost him an extra decade of being wrongly imprisoned. That conviction quashed in 2003 after years of protesting his innocence. We'll bring you more on that as we get it, but we're just hearing, as I say, that the wrongly jailed Andrew Malkinson could have been freed a decade earlier. Well, those are the latest headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Much more on that breaking story and much more throughout the next half hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. The Prime Minister is hosting 45 European leaders at Buckingham Palace today. To find out why, let's talk to the chief political correspondent at The Times, Aubrey Allegretti. Aubrey, what's going on?
So Sir Keir Starmer has really sort of been handed the best start possible to his premiership by inheriting this summit that Rishi Sunak offered to organise at Buckingham Palace in Oxfordshire. It's going to see a gathering of European leaders, not just those in the EU, importantly, because this is people and countries which are very much in the sphere of Europe. And so I think this is the 3rd or 4th meeting. The things on the agenda are migration and a chance for Keir Starmer to put front and centre his promise to reset relations with the EU and Europe. He's seeking a new defence and security pact, and he'll also be able to demonstrate his conviction to continuing to support Ukraine, regardless of the government changing its political colours last month.
Page of the Times today, your story, PM seeks deal with Europe on migrants. This is some kind of proposal to have a returns agreement when it comes to small boats, so sending some small boats, those who come over on small boats, to France, and then for us in return to accept some migrants from the rest of the European Union. Is that something that's actually been detailed at all?
So this is the start of probably quite a long negotiation, and David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has sort of responded to the story by saying, we shouldn't expect anything out of this summit which is going to necessarily kind of announce an agreement, but it is a really important first step. And we've seen particularly Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron cozying up to each other. So that's a really important relationship for Labour to forge to try and get consensus. I suppose the difficulty are the 2 points of tension hanging over this conference. Number one, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EU Council, Commission rather, is not there, and therefore she won't be able to sort of sit down and talk about how the UK might be able to forge some kind of deal EU-wide. The second is that there is some disgruntlement about the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. He has made so-called peace missions to speak to people like Putin and Trump, and that has really upset some European leaders who see it as undermining Europe's support as a whole for Ukraine. So there are 2 points of tension hanging over this summit.
It's interesting, this returns agreement idea. It was floated, of course, by Rishi Sunak back at the Franco-British summit in the Elysee Palace a couple of years ago. Macron at that point saying there would be no returns agreement between two countries bilaterally. It would have to be Britain with the whole of the European Union. That seems like it's very much still the case.
That's absolutely right. And it's arguably why Ursula von der Leyen's absence today is more conspicuous. Now, she's obviously fighting for re-election to her Brussels post, and that's why she's not available to be there. And so I think Keir Starmer will still try and find a way of sort of smoothing the wheels. Getting people like Emmanuel Macron on side is an important way for trying to lay the ground for a future EU-wide returns deal. But yeah, if Ursula von der Leyen's there, we're not going to see any kind of breakthrough today.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent at The Times.
Now, it is interesting that there is going to be this horse trading, these preliminary conversations, but very unlikely anything that actually comes concretely out of what's happening today, other than, introductions. Hello, I'm Sir Keir Starmer.
I'm just there wondering about this, whole talk of returns agreements. I mean, is this potentially the UK considering signing up to an EU-wide asylum policy? Because that would be surely unthinkable.
I don't think it would
following
be that
Brexit.
Not unthinkable for this government, who's explicitly said they want to get closer to the European institutions, not join the institutions, but in many ways shadow the institutions. They've already spoken about getting back into Europol, sharing fingerprint data, all this sort of stuff, bit by bit, agreement by agreement. I think it's very much within the scope of this government to maybe join some sort of pooled European migration programme.
Yes, and is this all part of the reset of relations with the European Union? Are we going to see the United Kingdom get closer and closer and closer and sign up to some of these Europe-wide schemes? We shall see. As Aubrey said there, it's all sort of in preliminary stages, nothing decided yet.
And we should say that MEPs will be voting on Ursula von der Leyen. They only get one candidate proposed to them in the true democratic EU style. There'll be a ballot paper before all 750 MEPs in Europe this afternoon that says Ursula von der Leyen, yes or no. So they get to vote for their one candidate, yes or no, to be the European Commission President. It's likely she'll win, but we'll bring you that result when it happens.
The height of democracy. The height of democracy. Anyway, tonight, Donald Trump is expected to speak for the first time since he was shot at the rally as he accepts the Republican nomination for presidency.
Well, he plans to build on his running mate J.D. Vance's vow to champion the forgotten Americans, with the central theme being to kickstart a golden age and make America great once again.
Yes, well, let's cross over to Ray Addison, who's in Milwaukee for us. Ray, it's a very big day. I imagine the crowds tonight will be absolutely massive. People will be clambering just to catch sight of Donald Trump.
Yeah, this is an absolutely huge venue. It sits around 18 to 20,000 people, and I think there's around 50,000 people that have come down here to attend the RNC itself, and not just within this venue here inside, but outside as well. There are hundreds of fringe events taking place, and the city has really just sort of come alive with Republicans. And this event took 3 years years of planning, and so they've really come in here in force. Now, this is day 4 of the convention. It centres around the theme of making America great once again, and it's going to be focusing on how Trump will, in the words of the Republican Party, usher in a new golden age for America. They're saying that Trump's agenda is aimed at addressing America's standing at home and abroad, ensuring that American families experience prosperity and safety, and create a resurgence for cities and communities. The Republican Party saying that Americans will once again have reason to harbour hope and optimism for the future of our country. Well, Donald Trump is due to speak, we're told, at around 8 o'clock Central Time here in the US. That's around 2 a.m. in the UK, although that's bound to overrun. And before him, we've got a number of other significant voices in the Republican Party speaking. One being Eric Trump, Donald Trump's son. We heard from Donald Trump Jr. last night introducing his VP running mate J.D. Vance. Well, Eric will take to the stage this evening. We'll also be hearing from former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, a man not without his own sense of controversy as well, and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be on the stage behind me too. And then in true Trump style, we're hearing that Dana White, the CEO of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, is set to get on the stage behind me and give a speech of his own. It will be his job, we're told, to introduce Donald Trump. And then, of course, that big moment when Donald Trump comes out, that much anticipated speech. He's ripped it up, he says, after that assassination attempt just 5 days ago. And it's going to be taking a more conciliatory approach to unite America. Maybe we'll hear about what it felt like from his perspective to be shot, the impact that it's had on him. And of course, it wouldn't be a Trump speech without hearing about his plans to end illegal migration on the southern border, to fix the US economy. And of course, he's also pledging to end the war in Ukraine should he win the election before he even takes office in January of next year. But I've been chatting to people here at the convention, seeing what they want to hear from Donald Trump tonight. This is what they had to say.
To make America great again, you know. I do think after this assassination attempt that he's going to try to be a little more unifying.
It's called Veritatis Splendor in Latin, the splendor of truth.
Yes.
Hoorah!
We're going to get some truth from him.
These lying punks.
I'm really hoping that he reaches out across the aisle and talks to everybody.
Look, I'm super pumped. I can't wait to hear his speech, and I think it'll be even more emotional.
Well, of course, this moment for Donald Trump, this huge moment for him in his presidential campaign, comes as Joe Biden was forced to back out of a speaking engagement that he had in Las Vegas last night. He says he's got COVID. People here at the Republican convention are not completely convinced, but also at the same time not really wanting to speak ill of the president. They can see that obviously he is a man of advancing years, but there is significant concern among the Democratic Party that he is not bowing out of this race gracefully and may indeed continue on to what Republicans here feel is the inevitable conclusion, certainly following that assassination attempt, of Donald Trump returning to the White House.
Thanks so much, Ray. Ray Addison, you are there in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention. Good stuff. And there's been a bit of a hoo-ha or some criticism over Nigel Farage being there.
Yes, he's there, he says, for a couple of days. But there have been some people who say, well, he's only just been elected Member of Parliament for Clacton. Why is he off in America? So I do think that that's a bit of it's a bit much to say that, you know, he can't go over and see the likely next president of the United States. I think if anything, you know, puts Clacton on the map a bit, it's that.
Maybe. And there's been it's quite funny, actually, really. It shouldn't be a clip going around of, which we'll show you in a little bit, I hope, of the lovely Emily Maitlis interviewing Nigel Farage there in the US. And she asks him, is Donald Trump having a hard time? Is Donald Trump having a hard time? And he goes, he nearly died. And he just stops. Nigel does. She goes, is he having a hard time? Yes, actually he is. Yes, Emily, he is having a hard time.
Yeah, people say that that after Margaret Thatcher was almost blown up by the IRA in 1984 in Brighton, at the Brighton Hotel, the Grand Brighton Hotel, people say that she was never quite the same again. When you have a near-death experience like that, it obviously stays with you. It'll be interesting to see how Donald Trump's speech this evening is perhaps different from speeches he's given before.
Yes, but I guess he just gives off the impression of being totally unfazed, really, you know, with the fight, and then getting back straight to it at the convention and all of that. But, yeah, it must take a toll. I mean, nearly dying in a way like that.
A bullet be grazed by a bullet. It's unimaginable, sort of what that could do to someone's psyche.
Tom was watching a video a little earlier of just how close it was, just how close. Anyway, coming up, should we be teaching our children about gender ideology? We're going to be debating this very shortly, following quite a bit of backlash at a London primary school who had their pupils pose with pride flags and all sorts. Don't go anywhere.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Should Prince Harry have accepted an award named after a US war hero at a glitzy ceremony last night? People begged him not to, but he did it anyway. It's time for tonight's head-to-head. Well, Prince Harry paid tribute to the eternal bond between mother and son as he appeared alongside his wife, Meghan Markle, at the glitzy ESPY Awards, dubbed the Sporting Oscars last night. The Duke accepted the Pat Tillman Award, named after a US war hero, for his Invictus Games work. But Harry's decision to accept the award was shrouded in controversy after more than 76,000 people signed a petition demanding he reverse his decision. Well, speaking last night, Harry paid tribute to Pat Tillman's mother, Mary. But that comes after Mary Tillman slammed his decision to give Prince Harry the gong, saying, "I am shocked as to why they would select such a controversial and divisive individual to receive the award. There are recipients that are far more fitting. These individuals do not have the money, resources, connections or privilege that Prince Harry has." So tonight I'm asking, should Harry have actually accepted the award? Let me know your thoughts. Go to gbnews.com/your say. Tweet me at GBNews and make sure you take part in our poll. But going head-to-head on this now, a former royal butler, Grant Harold, and the journalist and broadcaster, Laurie Turner. Thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. Laurie, I will start with you. I mean, the mother didn't want Harry to have it, but he did it anyway. What do you think?
I just think it's incredibly tone deaf. He seems to have an amazing ability to not read the room. It wasn't like this was a surprise because the opposition to him getting this award had been growing. So he had the chance to say, actually, I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to accept the award, but he didn't.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 1. Now, the Labour Member of Parliament, Rosie Duffield, has hit out at a primary school for posting a picture online of one of their students posing with pro-trans and pride flags.
Not just one, about 20, a whole host. About 20 of them, I'd say. The Labour MP argues these children have no meaningful concept of sexuality or gender identity and should essentially be left alone. Well, is she right?
Well, joining us now is the co-founder co-founder of Thoughtful Therapists, James Esses, who supports Rosie Duffield's position, and the LGBTI liberation campaigner, Peter Tatchell, who's for children celebrating Pride. Why don't we start with you, James?
Yes.
What's wrong here?
Well, this image, and there's many more on top of this in a variety of schools up and down the country, but this essentially encapsulates a notion of children being, I'm going to say, ideologically indoctrinated, but more than this, being sexualised at school by their teachers. This goes far beyond acceptance, respect, tolerance of same-sex attraction and age-appropriate sex education. This is teachers pushing their own ideologies, nefarious ideologies, on their pupils.
Peter, do you think this is a benefit to these children?
Well, no primary school is teaching pupils about sex. They teach young people about love and respect for others, other people with different races, different faiths, different sexualities. But it's not about sex, it's about respect for LGBT plus people. And in particular, in this teaching, it's about respect for people of different families. So they teach young people that some kids will have a mum and dad, some will be single parents, some may live in extended families with grandparents or cousins or uncles, and some will live with same-sex parents. But there is absolutely no teaching in any primary school about sex. This we don't know the full details, but I think this particular school was merely attempting to acknowledge that some of the kids in the school will have same-sex parents, and that should be respected, but it's not about sex.
Peter, James, one of the young boys there was holding up a sign saying, "I can't even think straight." That goes beyond just teaching people that people have different families.
Oh, of course it does. I mean, that's the type of sign you might expect to see on a stag or a hen do, not in a primary school classroom. I mean, you know, I fundamentally disagree with Peter. No surprises, though. Peter has previously said that UK schools should teach students about the erotic value of foreplay.
Secondary schools, young people aged 16 and over, not in primary school,
fair enough, Peter,
and not
but
for young kids in secondary school.
The point is that the teaching, the symbolism here is very clearly linked to sex. This school is part of a federation of schools. I posted recently photographs from one of the sister schools in which children are drawing flags representing omnisexuality, asexuality, pansexuality. Those are sex-based terms, and children as young as 5 years old are being exposed to this.
That's very true, isn't it? Pansexuality, that is obviously about sex.
It's about an identity. It's not about sex.
Oh, come on, Peter. Pansexuality, obviously that's about sex.
It's about saying some people may fall in love with someone of the same gender or a different gender. That's all it's about. It's not about sex.
Peter, I refuse to believe that you actually genuinely think that young children this age should be, you know, being handed signs saying, "I can't even think straight," or having the progress flag and learning all about gender identity and whatnot. Is it not a bit much? They are very young.
I agree that some of these slogans may have been inappropriate. It all depends on whether the children understood the issues. But we have to remember that young kids today are becoming aware of their sexuality or gender identity at a very young... Some are becoming aware at a very young age, and those kids need support. And those who have same-sex parents or a trans parent, they need support too, to not feel left out, not feel excluded, not feel marginalised. It's about kindness to pupils in our schools who come from different families and different parents.
James, just because the word sexuality has the word sex within it, that could well mean male-female rather than intercourse.
Well, as we've just said, terms like pansexuality, omnisexuality relate to the type of person you are sexually attracted to. I'm more concerned by the imposition of gender ideology, this notion suggesting to these impressionable young children that they may have been born in the wrong body. That's what I'm concerned about. And I've spoken to parents from this school who've reached out and said they are extremely concerned by what's going on. They were never informed about this. They were never even asked for their consent for their children to be used in this photograph that was posed online. I mean, the whole thing is a disgrace.
Well, I agree parents should be informed and engaged. It should be a cooperation between teachers, parents and pupils. But I've got to emphasise, a lot of young lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans kids grow up feeling very alienated, very fearful of who they are.
But at this age...
they need reassurance. They need reassurance.
At this young age, you're not thinking about who you're sexually attracted to and the like. So I can't see what purpose it serves.
Well, I look back at my own childhood, and at the age of 8, I knew that I liked men. I didn't see it as sex at all. I just thought I would like to be with a man. Lots of young kids have those feelings
But
today.
is this encouraging children to think about whether they're born in the wrong body or whether they'd be happier as a boy and a girl at such a young age?
No one should be encouraged. No one should be encouraged, but they should be supported if
But it's
that's
sort of
the way
making
they
it
feel.
cool, isn't it? No?
No, it's about giving reassurance to kids who are often very anxious about their sexuality or gender identity. And we know lots of young kids go through a great deal of personal trauma, and some even feel like taking their own lives. We've got to stop that. And it's not about encouraging or promoting, it's about being supportive.
Last word to you, James.
I mean, where to begin? Peter's politicising and weaponising the idea of suicide. This has been debunked. The fact of the matter is these are young children, pre-pubescent children. We should not be teaching them sex in this way. We should not be suggesting to them that they may have been born in the wrong body and then encouraging them or affirming them down a pathway of irreversible transition. This is completely unprofessional, inappropriate. The government has released guidance saying that schools should not be doing this, and the government needs to do something to clamp down on this before it's too late and more children become harmed off the back of this radical ideology.
Yeah, no children should be harmed. I agree with that.
Well, there we go. A point of consensus, although much disagreement as well. We'll have to leave it there. James says, Peter Tanchel, thank you so much for talking through that contentious issue.
Yes, let us know what you make of it. gbnews.com/your say. But coming up, the Prime Minister says COVID policy failed UK citizens, reacting to the UK COVID inquiry findings as they published their first report today.
We'll bring you all the latest after your headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 32 minutes past 1, and the top story, we'll just start with some breaking news, a recap that we heard in the last half hour or so, that a man who was wrongly convicted of rape and went on to spend 17 years in jail could have been exonerated almost a decade earlier, a review has found today. In light of those findings, Andrew Malkinson says the Criminal Cases Review Commission obstructed his fight for justice and, he says, cost me an extra decade wrongly imprisoned. Well, in the last few minutes, Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood says the chairwoman of the Criminal Cases Review Commission is unfit to fulfil her duties. It's understood that Shabana Mahmood is now seeking to remove Helen Pitcher from that position after the failings in Andrew Malkinson's case. The first report from the COVID inquiry has found that all 4 UK nations were failed by a lack of process, of planning and policy for a pandemic. The 240-page document reveals the government made serious errors and there were significant flaws in how the outbreak was dealt with in 2020. It also found the measures in place were outdated and complex. Baroness Hallett has now made 10 recommendations to avoid a repeat of what she has described as those fatal flaws in any future health emergency. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to use today's summit of European leaders to push for joint action on illegal migration. The Prime Minister's hosting around 45 foreign leaders at Buckingham Palace in Oxfordshire, where defence, security and energy are on the agenda. Earlier this afternoon, he used his opening speech to reaffirm the UK's support for Ukraine, saying the threat from Russia reaches right across Europe. In the US, Joe Biden has now been forced to pull out of a campaign speech after contracting coronavirus. The White House says the 81-year-old is having mild symptoms from the infection, but they say he is vaccinated, he's boosted and isolating while he continues his duties. It comes as the US president's facing growing pressure to step aside because of his age. And there are also reports that the 2 top Democrats in Congress have met him in private to express concerns over his re-election bid. A football club in Hertfordshire has paid tribute to one of the British men who has gone missing in Sweden. Juan Cifuentes used to play for Welland Garden City before disappearing alongside Farouk Abdul-Razak. Their families are now appealing for information on their whereabouts amid fears the men might have been victims of a double murder. Greater Manchester Police is promising to take action following a report that's discovered officers are abusing their power. It was set up after complaints about the treatment of 3 women in custody and its unlawful arrests of strip searching being carried out. Dame Vera Baird carried out the review following the reports that 3 women had been accusing the force of those unjustified strip searches. She said the inquiry found many of the arrests were unnecessary and unlawful. And banks have been told to improve how they treat political figures following a review into so-called debanking. The UK's financial watchdog found most firms could deal with MPs better so they're not subject to excessive checks or bans. The issue was made headline when Nigel Farage claimed he had his account closed because of his political views. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Another update at 2 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's another look at how the markets are faring this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2987 and €1.1883. The price of gold, £1,897.40 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,247 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello, very good day to you. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. For many, there is going to be plenty of fine sunny weather around as we go through the rest of today and feeling pretty hot at times too, but towards the northwest of the UK, there is a system here pushing its way in, and this is bringing quite a bit of cloud across many parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and some rain too, especially across western Scotland and also parts of Northern Ireland as well. Further east, a bit drier here, and across much of England and Wales, it's a fine picture. One or two showers may develop, but I think on the whole we're going to stay dry with plenty of sunshine, and with that feeling markedly hotter than it has done recently. Temperatures getting to highs of around 28 Celsius. Cooler towards the northwest though, and here it is going to stay pretty cloudy as we go through this evening. Further rain to come, especially across western parts of Scotland. In the east around Aberdeenshire we may get some brightness breaking through, but on the whole a largely cloudy picture for much of Scotland, and across Northern Ireland too, with further outbreaks of rain as we go through the evening. But sticking with the fine sunny weather for many parts of England and Wales, lots of late sunshine to look forward to, and with those high temperatures during the daytime, it is going to be a warm evening as well. The cloud and the rain across northern parts does continue for a little bit of time, but I'm expecting the rain to ease a bit overnight, so it really just be over higher ground where we're going to see much, if any, rain overnight. Most places otherwise turning dry. Clearer skies across parts of England and Wales, though there could be some mist and fog patches developing in the west. It is going to be a warm night, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, could be uncomfortable for sleeping for some of us. Then through tomorrow, still quite cloudy across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, though a bit brighter than today, and there will be a bit of rain pushing in towards the Outer Hebrides later on. Otherwise, it's looking mostly dry, apart from one or two showers perhaps, and plenty of sunshine yet again. And with that, temperatures are going to be even higher than today, likely to get in the low 30s towards the southeast.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello to you. I'm Jules Buckley. There's some heavy traffic on the eastbound M62 this lunchtime. Now, the stretch between Tingley Junction 28 and Lofthouse at Junction 29, that's the turn-off for the M1 there. And now there was a collision. It's now been moved safely onto the hard shoulder, but all lanes open and looking slow. Now, the Wrexham Road bypass, the A41, this is in Whitchurch in Shropshire. Now, that's still closed off between the A49 at the Chester Road roundabout and the turn-off for the Whitchurch Services roundabout. There's been a collision there. M5 southbound, long delays. Now, a collision is currently meaning the carriageway part blocked just away from the M6 junction 8 down towards West Bromwich at 1. There's a spillage of hydraulic oil as well, so big queues on the approach. And both sides of the M1 seen delays around Luton 10 to Red Bull 9 for an earlier police incident.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. Just coming up to 20 to 2, and the UK COVID-19 inquiry has published its first report today, laying bare the failures of the UK to properly prepare for a pandemic.
Yes, the 240-page document reveals there were significant flaws in how the outbreak was dealt with back in 2020, and people were failed by the lack of preparation for such a pandemic.
Properly prepare for a pandemic.
Hard to say.
Peter Piper picked a pick of pickled peppers.
He's going mad. He's officially going mad.
Absolutely loopy. Let's cross to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who is outside the inquiry. Mark, this is a significant day.
Yes, indeed, and Baroness Hallett, in that first of some 9 COVID inquiry reports that we'll get over the next couple of years, is damning in terms of what the government did or didn't do in terms of its preparations for a health emergency, and not just the UK government but the devolved governments as well. The plans, she said, were outdated. They focused on the wrong pandemic. They were focused on the potential for an influenza pandemic rather than looking at what was occurring in Asia and in the Middle East with coronavirus type outbreaks that were occurring there. And that just really wasn't factored into those plans. And indeed, she said that the plan, such as it was from 2011, just didn't stand up in any way to actually real life outbreak or pandemic. Once that pandemic started to grip, that emergency plan was effectively just thrown out of the window, she said. And she also went on to say that the institutions and structures responsible for emergency planning were labyrinthine in their complexity. There were fatal strategic flaws, she said, underpinning the assessment of the risks faced by the UK. A little earlier, I spoke to Elkan, is a lawyer representing some 7,000 of the families, the victims of the COVID outbreak, and he welcomed this first report, but he said now the government must act on being properly prepared for a future pandemic.
Preparedness was completely inadequate, and the chair of the inquiry recognised that in her report, and the families are pleased to see her recognition of it. We're also pleased to see, on the whole, the recommendations that follow, although there are certain areas we'd have liked to see further clarity, I think. Yeah, they were obsessed with the influenza pandemic, but even on that basis, they were not well prepared for that. There was really no preparedness at all, and it's not just for pandemics. I suspect we are poorly prepared for all sorts of emergencies and disasters.
So Baroness Hallett has come up with 10 recommendations that she says she expects the government to adopt. They include a radical simplification of the civil emergency preparedness and resilience systems, and crucially as well, the creation of a single independent statutory body that is responsible for health emergency preparedness.
Well, Mark White, thank you very much for bringing us all of that outside the COVID inquiry. Some really interesting recommendations there. I've always felt that during the pandemic, things were slightly too fragmented. You had different rules in Scotland, different rules in Wales, different rules in England, and in Northern Ireland, for that matter. And it seems that one of the recommendations here isn't that there should be a UK-wide approach. It's saying that all of the different devolved administrations should do these sort of practice runs every year or every few years about what it would be like to have another pandemic.
What, you don't think that that would be a coordinated exercise?
Well, it's still saying that these different groups should get together and do these exercises, including those devolved authorities. I wonder if things would have been better if there was just one single authority that decided policy for the whole country.
I'm trying to imagine what these... Oh, there's an argument against devolution. These... I'm trying to think about what these kind of exercises would look like. OK, so one day everyone's told, OK, today we have to imagine that a pandemic has hit, or we've just heard that a pandemic is in X country. What do we do? Do it be like that?
Well, yeah, because that happens currently in the Ministry of Defence. So every now and again they will have people who take a day out of their normal, sort of job in the MOD to come in, sit around a table, they lock the doors, they say, right, the Chinese have invaded Taiwan, what do we do? and they sit around and they thrash it out and they war game the strategy. I would imagine it's exactly the same that's going to be mandatory to do now for pandemics. Well, there's been another lab leak in Wuhan, or whatever it is.
But when it actually happens, it's all out the window, isn't it? New people are in charge. But yes, the creation of a single independent statutory body responsible for preparedness and response. Another statutory body.
Yeah, that's just what we need. More government, I think.
More government, more government. That's exactly what we need. Let us know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. Of course, it was all a very traumatic experience for a lot of you, I imagine. But lots of you have been getting in touch, particularly about that debate we just had on the primary school with all the kids with the pride flag and whatnot. We're going to read out some of those after this short break.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
I'm joined now by royal biographer and former royal photographer, Ian Lloyd. Ian,
hello, Jacob.
Thank you
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be great, isn't it? The opportunity to go around and see where the King comes onto the balcony from. Really interesting insight to how Buckingham Palace works.
It's exciting. I went yesterday, there was a press preview, and the thing that struck me first of all is that if you're the King and or the late Queen and you're on the balcony, you can't see the Mall. I mean, we all see people coming down from the top, thousands of people crowding in towards Buckingham Palace. They can't see it because of this great monument to Queen Victoria called the Queen Victoria Memorial, or they call it the wedding cake, but it blocks the view. So apparently the King has a TV in there. And the late Queen did as well. So what they do is they when they're waiting to come on, they're watching the TV to see how the crowd's getting nearer the palace. And the other thing that struck me is when we were on it looking down, is you can actually see individual faces in the crowd out there because we looked out, So they do get a good view of what's happening directly underneath the palace,
So they can see individuals. So if there's a friendly face in the crowd, they can see that person and possibly even wave. But they can't see that enormous mass of people you get at the big events that goes back towards Admiralty Arch.
The other thing I learned is there's a great historical link because the person that put the east wing on the palace, because it was originally 3 sides, and Queen Victoria had, of course, 9 children, so they had to build a 4th side for all the nurseries and things. Edward Blord was the architect, but the master builder was Thomas Cubitt.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 1:49 in the afternoon, of course. We had a bit of a fiery debate earlier, if you were tuned in. This was all sparked by Rosie Duffield, the Labour MP, who was concerned by a picture she saw of a primary school where lots of very small children were, waving the progress flag and carrying placards saying, "I can't even think straight." And it got us thinking about these sorts of things in schools. Lots of you said, Kathy said, children shouldn't be indoctrinated with adult ideology. They can decide for themselves who are what they are as they grow into adults. Anthony says, why do schools need to teach anything about sex other than contraception to avoid unnecessary pregnancies? And Grumpy Grandad. Hi, Grumpy Grandad. You say children should not be spoon-fed any ideology, pride, religion. Doesn't matter what it is, it shouldn't happen. Yes, I'm not sure I found many comments that were positive.
No, there was a school in London just this week that took children on a march against an Ocado warehouse opening near the school.
Yes, I saw that.
Did you see the children sort of going with big sort of signs saying no Ocado, no building here, no warehouse here, and it's like these children, how old were they? Like 4 or 5? They don't have political opinions. You can't ascribe that to them. I think it's just very distasteful when children are included in any political cause.
Yeah, it does feel that way. I mean, what do they care about an Ocado, you know? Yeah, they have a very strong feeling about planning regulations.
Ocado should be able to open a warehouse if it wants to open a warehouse.
But Mark on Starmer and Keir Starmer and the European summit, he says, makes a nice change for the UK Prime Minister to actually speak to European leaders to resolve our problems, rather than just shout rhetoric at them from Westminster. I mean, that's a bit harsh. I mean, Rishi Sunak did try to speak to European leaders.
I literally went with Rishi Sunak to the Franco-British summit at the Elysee Palace, where they were hugging each other. They were saying, "Mon ami, my friend." You know, they were really. They couldn't have. There was no shouting. I think we're misremembering the last 2 years.
I mean, it is a possibility that Sir Keir Starmer, having been a Remain voter, being for the European Union as a concept, might have some better talks with some of the members. I don't know. Maybe.
Or just give away more.
Maybe.
But more locally now, because the Welsh Parliament has come under fire for passing a bill that offers financial assistance schemes to promote diversity in its candidates. Well, our national reporter, Charlie Peters, is here to tell us more. Charlie, what on earth's going on?
Yeah, well, so Wales has been under the spotlight recently this week in terms of its First Minister resigning after just 118 days. As a consequence, I've taken a look at recent legislation passed in the Welsh Parliament. Last week, a new bill went forward on its 4th reading and passed, now waiting for royal assent, called the Elections and Elected Bodies Bill. Now, this government, the Welsh Government, described it as radical and groundbreaking. It's now former Counsel General used those terms. It is going to add 400,000 people potentially to the electoral register by automatically qualifying them as voters. But more troublingly, according to some critics I've spoken to, it has another subsection which has raised some alarm bells, which is that it has advised ministers that they must promote diversity in all elections in Wales, not just for the Senedd, but also for county and local elections. So that would include advising ministers to keep an eye on any instances where there is an underrepresentation of certain identities within those elected officials. That's section 27 of the bill. But it's the next section that's attracting some attention, section 28, which says that the Welsh Government and ministers are now permitted to provide financial assistance in the aim of promoting diversity according to, and this is what it says in the bill, specified characteristics. Now, I've gone to the Welsh Government and asked them, what are those specified characteristics? Who should receive additional funding when going for an election in that 1 month period before a vote? They wouldn't tell me. But they did say that it is vital that our elected bodies represent the diversity of people in Wales. And a spokesperson added that this legislation will pave the way in tackling barriers to participation. They said that we will set out proposals for what these protected characteristics will be shortly, and these will be developed and consulted upon widely. They don't know yet.
They just want to give taxpayers money to, quote-unquote, diverse candidates.
Yeah.
But these are supposed to be elected candidates. It's almost like they're heading towards some sort of quota system.
Yeah, well,
that's not democracy.
In the Senedd, there are 5% of the elected representatives there, members of the Senedd, are from ethnic minority backgrounds. That tracks against a wider 5.6% represented. Well, 0.6 off, so perhaps
Charlie, thank you very much for bringing us that story. It's almost as if the NHS is fixed, the roads are fixed, the potholes are fixed, and now they can concentrate on this. We'll be back in just a second. Lots more to come on this, including on that COVID inquiry, of course, and what's going on in Europe. Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi again, here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. Temperatures are going to be rising. Plenty of fine weather for many parts of the UK. However, in the northwest there will still be quite a bit of cloud as we go through the end of the week and further rain to come too. We currently have a weather system which is gradually making its way a little bit further eastwards, but this is going to break up as we go through the day. So a little bit less rain overnight, and any rain over Scotland likely to be confined just to the higher ground, and most other places turning dry. After a warm evening across England and Wales in particular, it is going to be a warm night. Not a huge amount of cloud around, but temperatures not dropping a huge amount. Some places staying with temperatures around 17 or 18 degrees. First thing tomorrow morning, there could be a few pockets of mist and fog around western parts of England and Wales perhaps, but for much of England and Wales it is going to be a fine start. Plenty of sunshine, and with that temperatures are going to start to rise pretty quickly. A cloudier story though across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Perhaps not as cloudy as today, but nonetheless a few spots of rain are possible as we go through the morning. Perhaps the brightest weather will be across more eastern parts of Scotland. A greater chance of seeing some sunshine here. Through the day we are going to see a bit more cloud building across far western parts of Scotland. In the Outer Hebrides, some rain pushing its way in here, and there could be some strong blustery winds to go with it. Elsewhere, and for Scotland, Northern Ireland, a drier day than today and a little bit brighter at times, but the best of the sunshine will be across much of England and Wales, and with that temperatures rising higher than today, highs of around 31 Celsius in the southeast, but everywhere it is going to feel relatively hot. As we go through the evening, we are going to see a bit more cloud and rain feeding into far northwestern parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but staying fine towards the southeast. There will be some wet weather pushing its way through as we go through Saturday and into Sunday, but Saturday could stay hot in the southeast. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our summer treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest cash prize of the year so far. With an extra £30,000 in your bank account this year, you could take the ultimate financial holiday and send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could get you those nagging home improvements done, buy that brand new car, or just enable you to kick back and relax for the rest of the year. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Go and get another glass of that bubbly, you've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 18th of July. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
COVID inquiry reports. The Prime Minister says the government's COVID-19 policy failed UK citizens off the back of these damning findings into the UK's first report into that pandemic response.
Hosting the Europeans, world leaders congregate in Buckingham Palace today as Sir Keir Starmer hosts what's known as the European Political Community Summit. Now, the Prime Minister wants a deal on migration, but what could it cost us?
Body parts murder case. 2 men are on trial for alleged murder following a gruesome discovery of a torso wrapped in cellophane in Salford wetlands. We'll be bringing you the very latest from Manchester Magistrates Court.
And we'll be live in Milwaukee, where Donald Trump is due to speak, accepting his party's nomination for the presidency. Nigel Farage, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, they're all there too.
Now, this COVID inquiry has made recommendations to the government, 10 of them, but it's also been critical of not just the response of ministers, but the civil service too. Indeed, it says civil service groupthink was partly to blame for the sluggish response to this pandemic.
That's very interesting, of course, because throughout the pandemic, when anything was seen to go wrong, ministers and the government were to blame, whether it was Matt Hancock, whether it was other health ministers, whether it was the Prime Minister at the time, and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of government behind those key figures that we elect and who sit in the cabinet. The whole civil service. Is there an issue with groupthink, not least when it comes to pandemics, but just in general?
Yeah, I think that's totally the case. I spent some days at the COVID inquiry listening to some of the evidence. I was there when Matt Hancock spoke. I was there when Dominic Cummings spoke. One of the really interesting things is they bring up all of the official recommendations from SAGE, that official scientific body that recommended all of the different measures. And especially for the first year of the pandemic, the government followed those recommendations to the letter. So I think there's a question mark in terms of, did we lock down too late? Should we have locked down at all? All of these questions. It's less so about the politicians and more so about the scientists who were advising the politicians, because the politicians did what the scientists said, especially in that first year.
Yes, for the most part. And, of course, there's huge amounts of bureaucracy, but it'll be very interesting if the focus does go onto the civil service and we start discussing, actually, are all the machinery of government, does it work in the best way possible? I mean, how many people work in the civil service?
Oh, I mean, it depends if you include what you include as the civil service. But in Whitehall, thousands, tens of thousands easily. But what you have, not physically in Whitehall, obviously, lots of different departments all over the country. But what you have actually, what Dominic Cummings has been talking about recently, when he set up the vaccines task force, which was arguably the most successful part of our pandemic response, what he did was get rid of all of the HR procedures that the civil service usually does. He disregarded every single ECJ ruling. He disregarded the normal employment procedures that the civil service loves and has built up over years, and created this isolated team that could hire and fire as it wanted to, that had the power to move the levers that it needed to. But as soon as that procurement was over, the civil service moved to shut down that team. It was an aberration. Oh, no, we have to bring back all of the HR procedures. We have to do this by the book. We can't just bring in external outside talent like that. It has to go through all the civil service processes.
They ran it like a streamlined business, like a start-up.
Yeah, and government can't, of course, we can't have any sort of business thinking in government. That's got to be shut down,
Wrong.
Clearly.
Bad.
Yeah.
Bad. Business bad. Profit bad.
Well, we're going to be getting to that and much, much more after your headlines with Sam Francis.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much. Good afternoon to you. It's just coming up to 5 minutes past 2, and the top story this afternoon, Sir Keir Starmer says that the report released this lunchtime from the COVID inquiry confirms that the UK was unprepared for the coronavirus outbreak. In the 240-page assessment released earlier, Baroness Hallett found there were significant and widespread failures from successive governments. The report also condemns the 2011 pandemic strategy for being virtually abandoned when COVID hit, with, she says, no focus on economic or social impacts. 10 recommendations have now been made, including a more simple approach to dealing with health and emergencies and conducting UK-wide pandemic exercises every 3 years. The Prime Minister says his government are committed to learning from the inquiry, as he expressed his heartfelt sympathies to those who lost their loved ones during the pandemic.
2019, it was widely believed in the United Kingdom and abroad that the UK was not only properly prepared, but was one of the best prepared countries in the world to respond to a pandemic. This belief was dangerously mistaken. In reality, the UK was ill prepared for dealing with the whole system civil emergency of a pandemic, let alone the coronavirus pandemic that actually struck.
Chair of the COVID inquiry, Baroness Hallett, there speaking earlier. Well, Volodymyr Zelensky is among more than 40 European leaders meeting in Oxfordshire, with more support being promised for Ukraine. And earlier, the Ukrainian president said when he arrived in Oxfordshire that he is counting on Sir Keir Starmer's support.
The UK demonstrated leadership from the very beginning of Russian attacks, and all the strong steps and some not simple steps, always UK began. So I count on my meeting. I will have meeting with Prime Minister, and also bilateral one, and also I will have meeting with the government.
And Sir Keir Starmer is hosting that summit at Buckingham Palace, which he hopes will fire the starting gun on a new relationship with the EU following Brexit. The Prime Minister says he wants to reset our relationship with the continent and to push for closer security ties with other countries. The group have now agreed on boosting defence capabilities in Ukraine as it continues to defend itself against Russia. In another blow to Joe Biden's efforts to get re-elected as US president, he's now contracted coronavirus, forcing him to pull out of a campaign speech last night. The White House says the 81-year-old is having mild symptoms from the infection, but they say he is vaccinated, he's boosted and currently isolating while he continues his duties. It comes as the US president's facing growing pressure to step aside because of his age. And this morning, an interview was released with Biden suggesting he would pull out of the race to the White House if medical professionals advised him to.
I made a serious mistake in the whole debate. And look, when I originally ran, you may remember it, I said I was going to be a transitional candidate. And I thought that I'd be able to move from this, just pass it on to someone else. But I didn't anticipate things getting so divided. And quite frankly, I think the only thing age brings is a little bit of wisdom. And I think I've demonstrated that I know how to get things done for the country.
The families of two British men who were reported missing in Sweden are now appealing for information on their whereabouts. It's feared the men could have been victims of a double murder. 33-year-old Juan Cifuentes and Farouk Abdul Razak, who's 37, travelled for a business trip but haven't come home. Officers in the area of Malmö were investigating after two bodies were found there in a burnt-out car on Sunday. Local media now reporting that they believe they were shot, though police are still working to identify the victims in the car. A man who was wrongly convicted of rape and jailed for 17 years could have been exonerated almost a decade earlier. A report out today has found that Andrew Malkinson was failed by the Criminal Cases Review Commission and could have been freed just 5 years after he was convicted in 2003. That conviction was quashed last summer. The Justice Secretary now says she wants the chair of the commission, Helen Pitcher, to be removed from her job. Two prominent MPs, both of whom were former government ministers overseeing the Post Office, are currently being questioned at the Horizon IT inquiry. Earlier, Labour's Pat McFadden was in the chair answering questions. He was Postal Affairs Minister. And now Sir Ed Davey is giving evidence. He's the leader of the Liberal Democrats and also held that role. They're being asked about errors in the Horizon IT system, which led to sub-postmasters being wrongly convicted of fraud. And the author of an explosive report into the treatment of people taken into custody by Greater Manchester Police is calling for urgent change. Dame Vera Baird carried out the review following reports that 3 women had accused the force of unjustified strip searches after being arrested. She says the inquiry did find that many of those arrests were unnecessary or unlawful. Greater Manchester Police has now apologised and says it accepts the recommendations from the inquiry. And finally, one last story for you before we head back to Tom and Emily. An experimental drug has been found to extend the lifespan of mice by 25%. And it's also thought it could work in humans. Researchers behind the trials say the animals were injected with an antibody called IL-11. And that treatment cut cancer deaths, reduced chronic inflammation and saw less muscle wasting, all key signs of ageing. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Your next update from the newsroom at 2:30.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 11 minutes past 2. Now, the Prime Minister says that the UK COVID inquiry report confirms the UK was underprepared for COVID-19 and that policy failed UK citizens.
Yes, the 240-page document reveals there were significant flaws in how the outbreak was dealt with in 2020, and people were failed by a lack of preparation.
Well, our Home and Security editor Mark White joins us outside the inquiry. He's been digging over all the detail. And Mark, interesting how the civil service, as well as politicians, come in for criticism here.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I think what Baroness Hallett's report really highlights is a sense of complacency, a wrong belief that the UK was somehow one of the better placed countries in the world in terms of its ability to deal with a global pandemic. That was absolutely not the case, according to Baroness Hallett. The contingency plans of preparedness plans that they had were out of date, they were cumbersome, they were looking at the wrong type of virus. They were focused, for instance, on a pandemic caused by influenza, rather than looking at the emerging viruses in Asia and the Middle East, coronavirus type diseases that were being seen in those countries. But she paints again a picture of this ponderous colossus of government departments and groupthink that were unable and unwilling to adapt to the changes in the sort of health threats that the world was facing. And she's come up with a number of key priorities that she believes will help try to stop what we saw during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, with the loss of 235,000 lives that were linked to COVID-19, and of course, very significant damage to the economy. We've been hearing from a lawyer acting for the families of some 7,000 coronavirus victims, who has welcomed this first report from the COVID inquiry, but says it's absolutely vital that the government now acts on the recommendations put forward by Baroness Hallett.
Preparedness was completely inadequate, and the chair of the inquiry recognised that in her report, and the families are pleased to see her recognition of it. We're also pleased to see, on the whole, the recommendations that follow, although there are certain areas we'd have liked to see further clarity, I think. Yeah, they were obsessed with the influenza pandemic, but even on that basis, they were not well prepared for that. There was really no preparedness at all, and it's not just for pandemics. I suspect we are poorly prepared for all sorts of emergencies and disasters.
Well, Baroness Hallett in a report said that the damaging absence of focus on the measures required, in particular a system that could be scaled up to test, trace and isolate in the event of a pandemic, was one of the key weaknesses. She also said that she had no hesitation in concluding that the processes, planning and the policy of the civil contingency structures within the UK government and the devolved administrations, we should add, were amounted to failing their citizens. So, as I say, a very damning report, and 9 other reports to come after this that will look at, for instance, what individual ministers did as this outbreak, as this pandemic took hold, the decisions they made for better or worse.
Very much chapter 1 of this COVID inquiry that is going to set us back close to £200 million.
Goodness.
So there you go. Thank you so much, Mark White, our Home and Security editor, with all the latest on that COVID inquiry.
Well, in other news, the Prime Minister says that Britain will never leave the European Court of Human Rights as he pledges to fight the new storm facing Europe.
Well, it comes as the UK is hosting the European Political Community Summit today alongside European leaders.
Well, let's speak to the political commentator now, Peter Spencer. Peter, a lot of people have commented on the fact that Keir Starmer's rather lucky to, in his first week, have been able to jet off to Washington, D.C. and mingle with all of the NATO leaders. And in his second week, he's hosting 45 European leaders in Buckingham Palace. All of these summits gifted to him by the last administration.
Absolutely right. I mean, it's like bingo with knobs on as far as he's concerned. And the gathering today, the European gathering, is crucially important to him because one of his primary missions is to, as he put it, reset relations with Europe. And of course, it also fits in very neatly with his overall objective to boost economic growth. And that will be in large measure done, with a bit of luck and following wind, by dint of investment in the British economy, not just from UK, but also from across the continent. And so here is his golden opportunity at the birthplace of Winston Churchill to be ever so nice to loads of people and have loads of meetings that otherwise might have taken months to get sorted. So yes, you're quite right. This is one of his luckiest of lucky days.
Yes, it's very convenient to have all of these leaders in the same place at the same time. You can have a quick word with all of them. You can have longer conversations with some of them. But Peter, all this talk about illegal migration, this is clearly a key theme for so many of these European leaders that are present, not least our own Sir Keir Starmer. It's sounding as though there's some kind of proposal for a migrant exchange scheme of sorts. France take back some of our illegal boat migrants, and then we take some from the European Union. I mean, is this pie-in-the-sky thinking? Is this something that could actually happen?
I think it is something that could happen, but it is not going to happen overnight, much like everything else that Keir Starmer has been talking about. Stuff takes time, and there'll be a great deal of negotiations and a great deal of complication along the way. But most certainly, it is a bit of an objective for Keir Starmer, having ditched the Rwanda scheme, to have something else up his sleeve. And some idea of returns deal. Also, I think probably more important is the cross-channel cooperation between British border folk and French border folk, and also reaching out further across Europe, with the idea being to actually smash the gangs, to use his terminology, to not just stop boats when they arrive, that's an effect, but also to go for causes, which is people smuggling gangs who put themselves in a position to actually ensure that people, or most of them, sadly, manage to at least get across the channel. He wants to stop that if he possibly can.
Well, Peter Spencer, thank you so much for bringing us all of that. Really interesting stuff, and quite a lucky general our Prime Minister seems to be.
So far. Our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, is at the summit at Buckingham Palace for us. Catherine, has any progress been made? Any particularly interesting meetings of note?
Well, we will hear a little bit later at the press conference. Keir Starmer is due to speak at 5 o'clock. But what a golden opportunity this is for him, along, of course, with the NATO summit last week. So we had the family photo. It's very noticeable. There's no parade of flags here. It's a rather more informal setting, getting together close on 50 European leaders, including some that don't necessarily get on particularly well. But what we have heard so far is that very clear reaffirming of support to Ukraine, no matter what. Obviously, looming is the possibility of a Trump presidency and what that could mean for Europe in that, with J.D. Vance now as vice presidential candidate, quite an isolationist, Europe will be having to think about how they may manage if the US pull back from support of Ukraine, but also on migration. Now, there has been a working group meeting in a very small room, I'm told, headed by Giorgia Meloni, the Italian PM. Of course, she had great relations with the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, but she's leading on this because, of course, illegal migration, 380,000 people entered the EU illegally last year, and Italy really on the front end of this. So Keir Starmer keen to build relations with her and other countries in that working group too, including like Denmark, really centre-left government, and others, Malta, Albania, etc. So Keir Starmer wants a security agreement. He wants access to fingerprinting information and much more to help crack down on these gangs. It's very clear that without Rwanda particularly, they do need, if they're going to crack down on these gangs, that has to be a cross-European project because these people are coming right across Europe to get here. Now, there's going to be quite an important meeting, a dinner tonight with President Macron. It does sound like there may be some further movement in the agreement that we currently have with France. We could hear an announcement on that a little bit later. We have heard talk potentially of some sort of exchange of migrants. Ultimately, Sir Keir Starmer would like a whole returns agreement with the EU. There is no prospect of that happening in the short term, not least because Ursula von der Leyen isn't even here. She's just been re-elected as leader of the European Commission, but that is a much, much bigger project. But there may be something with France, and we will find out in the coming hours.
Yes, another 5 years for Ursula von der Leyen, chief of the Commission. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine Forster from Buckingham Palace.
I love those European elections where MEPs, all 750 odd of them, sit there in their hemispherical parliament.
Hemispherical?
Hemisphere, yeah. And given a little piece of paper, a ballot paper. Okay. But unlike the ballot papers that you and I are used to, with, like multiple candidates to choose between, they have just one name there, Ursula von der Leyen.
Ursula, yes.
Now, they do get to say yes or no, but that's all they get to say. So obviously such a knife-edge vote for her, the only candidate there in the Commission formal presidential election.
And what would have happened if more people said no?
Then they'd have to go away. The Council would have to propose a different candidate. But the whole point of the European Council is that they always sort of propose one candidate, and very often it's not someone that you'd expect. Do you remember when Jean-Claude Juncker got in? And people weren't expecting it to be Jean-Claude Juncker. And after he went, no one at all expected Ursula von der Leyen would be the candidate of any of these parties. There were what's known as Spitzenkandidaten debates a few years ago, and she wasn't even featured in those debates. And then a grubby little compromise was made between the council members and promoted her, and there we have it.
Yes, people often joke, don't they, that, it's failed national politicians often make it to the top of Brussels.
You only
I don't know if that's fair or not.
Oh,
that's
I don't know.
fair or not.
Neil Kinnock, Peter Mandelson. Like, you generally have to have lost an election in the UK before you get a job in the EU. Well, at least that used to be the case.
Or another country. Coming up, we're going to be crossing over live to our reporter in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, ahead of Donald Trump's nomination for presidency. Stay with us.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A new report suggests that Prince Harry is lonely in California and he's considering returning to Britain despite a seismic falling out with his father and his brother.
But the question we're asking this morning is whether Meghan would come with her Prince Charming or whether Harry would perhaps be more welcome here if he came solo.
Like Kinsey, we'll go to Kinsey Schofield live now in LA. Kinsey, we've got lots of time to talk about this and speculate this. We've got about 6 minutes or so to talk. But what's behind all of this? Where are these thoughts coming from?
They're coming from royal author Hugo Vickers, and I don't know if you're familiar with Mr. Vickers, but he's written over 30 books about the British royal family. And he told The Sun that Prince Harry will ultimately return to the UK with his tail between his legs. He described the Duke of Sussex as angry and says Harry is genuinely petrified of losing his wife, Meghan Markle. When asked his predictions for where Harry and Meghan will be in the next 20 years, Vickers told The Sun, I think he'll come home, explaining, I think Harry will come home, and if he comes home, we must be very nice to him because he won't particularly want to. He's quite angry, suggesting that he would be coming home solo. Vickers also said that Prince Harry looks slightly petrified of Meghan Markle and that King Charles has left the door wide open for Harry's return if and when he does decide to come back.
I can only imagine the culture shock that Prince Harry has faced arriving there. This is a kid that has grown up in castles.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 2. Now, tonight, Donald Trump is expected to speak for the first time since he was shot at a rally in Pennsylvania as he accepts the Republican nomination for the presidency.
Yes, he plans to build on his running mate J.D. Vance's vow to champion forgotten Americans, with the central theme being to kickstart a golden age and make America great once again.
Well, our man Ray Addison is there at the convention in Milwaukee. And Ray,
he's outside.
Things are getting going, of course, but a lot of anticipation for what Donald Trump will say this evening.
A lot of anticipation and a lot of security as well. I want to just get out of the way and let you see some of the security elements that we have here at the Fiserv Forum in Milwaukee. I've never seen so many police officers, and they all appear to be from different forces as well. I'm certainly no expert on US law enforcement, but I think we've got some state troopers over there. We've got some beat officers as well. And if we pan back round the other way, we can see this security cordons that we've got, fences everywhere. You could not move an inch without going through some kind of scanner, some kind of check. You've got the metal detectors down there. We've got these passes, which I've taken off to go on air. But we've got these passes with these QR codes, and you don't even need to, they just get scanned as you walk into the general area of the security check. It's very, very sophisticated, and it is exactly what you would expect. And where there are no police officers, we have camera crews, news crews from all over the world. And of course, this is very, very early here. It's about 8:30 in the morning here in Milwaukee, and but there's so many news crews in there going live all over the globe, and there is serious attention to this speech from Donald Trump. And of course, we heard from him the other day, didn't we, after that assassination attempt, saying how he had ripped up the script, the speech that he'd already worked on. He said it was an excellent speech, but he didn't want to say that anymore. He wanted to focus on American unity. And so a lot of people here very excited to hear what he's going to say and find out how is he going to do that. What words will he use to try and unify this country? The Democrats, the undecided, the Republicans come together under what seems to be the increasing likelihood that he will regain the White House and become the 47th president of the United States. This is the final day of the Republican National Convention, and this speech tonight is not just an opportunity to hear from Donald Trump, but also he will formally accept that nomination unless we get a complete script change. And he says, you know, being shot has made me think life's too short, and I've decided not to become president again. Very, very unlikely. I don't think that's going to happen. So he will accept that nomination. He'll talk to us. He'll tell us about how it feels to have had that close brush with death, that bullet whizzing through past his ear, striking his ear. And it's really, this moment has been a real key moment for the Republicans. It's eliminated any doubt that some of them, and there was a lot that had doubts about Donald Trump, it's eliminated that doubt for them. There's a very heavy religious element here too, and they feel that God protected Donald Trump last Saturday, and that if it's, you know, God has in some ways kind of endorsed his candidacy, and so they're now unifying behind him. So a sense of energy, a sense of renewal for the Republican Party as well. And of course that moment when he was shot and he dropped to his feet, and then he rose and he put his fist in the air and he shouted the word fight, fight, fight. That has become iconic, and you will hear that tonight when he is speaking. You will hear that chanting out over and over again, fight, 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 just like you would hear traditionally that the expression USA, USA, USA. But you will hear that from the audience here tonight. A lot of excitement about what Trump's going to say.
Well, Ray Addison, thank you for bringing us all of that, and very interesting to see the level of security there. Clearly something in deep, deep consideration after that assassination attempt.
Yes, huge amounts of security arrangements, isn't there? And obviously we know why, because there's always a threat to these types of things. All the talk about God, there's a lot of people saying he was saved by God, aren't there? But, I mean, it did look miraculous, didn't it? The fact he got away with that. Anyway, coming up, the Welsh Parliament is in hot water for passing a bill that offers financial assistance schemes to promote diversity in candidates. What's all this about? More on that after your headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just after 2:30. The top story this hour. The COVID-19 inquiry has found that the government failed the public because of flawed policy, process and planning for a pandemic. The 240-page document reveals the government made serious errors and that there were significant flaws in how the outbreak was dealt with in 2020. It also found the measures in place were outdated and complex. Baroness Hallett, who chaired the inquiry, has now made 10 recommendations to avoid a repeat of what she described as those fatal flaws in any future health emergency. Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to use today's summit of European leaders to push for joint action on illegal migration. The Prime Minister's hosting around 45 foreign leaders at Buckingham Palace in Oxfordshire, with defence, security and energy on the agenda. Earlier, he used his opening speech to reaffirm the UK's support for Ukraine, saying the threat from Russia reaches right across Europe. In the US, Joe Biden has been forced to pull out of another campaign speech after contracting coronavirus. The White House says the 81-year-old is having mild symptoms from the infection, but that he is vaccinated, boosted and isolating, they say, while he continues his duties. It comes as the US president's facing growing pressure to step aside because of his age, with reports that two top Democrats in Congress have privately met with him to express their concerns over his re-election bid. A man who was wrongly convicted of rape and spent 17 years in jail could have been exonerated almost a decade earlier. That's according to a review out today. In light of the findings, Andrew Malkinson says the Criminal Cases Review Commission obstructed his fight for justice, and he says cost me an extra decade wrongly imprisoned. Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood says the chairwoman of the Criminal Cases Review Commission is unfit to fulfil her duties. It's understood she wants Helen Pitcher to be removed from that position after the failings in the case. A football club in Hertfordshire has paid tribute to one of the British men who's gone missing in Sweden. Juan Cifuentes used to play for Welland Garden City before disappearing alongside Farouk Abdul-Razak. Their families are appealing for information on their whereabouts amid fears the men might have been victims of a double murder. A report has found that officers with Greater Manchester Police have been abusing their power by carrying out unlawful arrests and treating victims as criminals. It was set up after complaints about the treatment of 3 women in custody and found unlawful arrests and strip searches are being carried out. Author Dame Vera Baird has made a series of recommendations to make sure that more humane and dignified treatment of those in custody is put in place. And finally, banks have been told to improve how they treat political figures following a review into so-called debanking. The UK's financial watchdog found most firms could deal with MPs better so that they're not subject to excessive checks or bans. The issue of debanking made headlines when Nigel Farage claimed he had had his account closed because of his political views. Those are the latest headlines for now from the newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. Your next update at 3 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's another look at the markets for you this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2987 and €1.1883. The price of gold this hour, £1,897.40 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,247 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello, very good day to you. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. For many, there is going to be plenty of fine sunny weather around as we go through the rest of today and feeling pretty hot at times too, but towards the northwest of the UK, there is a system here pushing its way in, and this is bringing quite a bit of cloud across many parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and some rain too, especially across western Scotland and also parts of Northern Ireland as well. Further east, a bit drier here, and across much of England and Wales, it's a fine picture. 1 or 2 showers may develop, but I think on the whole we're going to stay dry with plenty of sunshine, and with that feeling markedly hotter than it has done recently. Temperatures getting to highs of around 28 Celsius. Cooler towards the northwest though, and here it is going to stay pretty cloudy as we go through this evening. Further rain to come, especially across western parts of Scotland. In the east around Aberdeenshire we may get some brightness breaking through, but on the whole a largely cloudy picture for much of Scotland and across Northern Ireland too, with further outbreaks of rain as we go through the evening. But sticking with the fine sunny weather for many parts of England and Wales, lots of late sunshine to look forward to, and with those high temperatures during the daytime, it is going to be a warm evening as well. The cloud and the rain across northern parts does continue for a little bit of time, but I'm expecting the rain to ease a bit overnight, so it really just be over higher ground where we're going to see much if any rain overnight, most places otherwise turning dry. Clearer skies across parts of England and Wales, though there could be some mist and fog patches developing in the west. It is going to be a warm night, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, could be uncomfortable for sleeping for some of us. Then through tomorrow, still quite cloudy across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, though a bit brighter than today, and there will be a bit of rain pushing in towards the Outer Hebrides later on. Otherwise, it's looking mostly dry, apart from 1 or 2 showers perhaps, and plenty of sunshine yet again. And with that, temperatures are going to be even higher than today, likely to get in the low 30s towards the southeast.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello again. I'm Jules Buckley. The Bells Hill bypass in North Lanarkshire, that's the A725. Now still shut between the A8, that's the Shorehead flyover, and the M8 junction 7A. The turn of Bells Hill and East Kilbride, a serious collision means the road's been closed since about 11:30 this morning. The A533, this is the Runcorn Road in Bartington in Cheshire. That's shut between the Tall Trees junction for the A49 and Stonehead Lane in Barnton. That is due to a collision being investigated. Also between the A49 at the Chester Road roundabout and the Whitchurch Services roundabout, the A41, the Wrexham Road bypass in Whitchurch in Shropshire, closed both ways for investigation work. And queuing anti-clockwise for the M25, that's before Wisley at junction 10. There's a broken down car that's currently blocking the inside lane there. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Right, it's 2:40 and Martin Dobney is up next and he joins us now. Martin, what have you got coming up this afternoon? Ursula von der Leyen back.
Yeah, well, 5 years ago today, guys, I voted against Ursula von der Leyen as a Brexit Party MEP. She scraped through by 9 votes then. She got through on a bigger margin today. I'll reveal the true horror of the backroom deals, the giveaways that she's promised to the Greens, and nothing at all on border control. What will this mean for Britain? Talking of which, Sir Keir Starmer's rolled out the red carpet. Isn't it lovely? At Buckingham Palace, munching on vol au vents. 50 European top brass. I thought we'd voted to leave. Will Mr Remain, will the People's Vote champion, the guy who campaigned to cancel Brexit, start to show his true colours? Resetting relationships? Sounds to me like giving power back to Brussels. Talking of which, we can't stop the boats. Today, 15,000 this year has been breached. I've got exclusive footage of boats arriving at Dover this morning, including a dramatic rescue video from a disaster in the Channel last night. We saw a British vessel leave our coast, go into French waters, perform a rescue and go back to France. Where's the French Coast Guard? Why are we doing their job? As you can see, I'm pretty fired up. It's going to be a great show, 3 till 6.
Goodness me, Martin, I'm looking forward to it. I have to say, I for one am shocked that the people smuggling gangs have not taken a look at our new Prime Minister and thought, my goodness me, that he's going to sue us and then just shut up shop. I'm amazed that strategy hasn't worked, but you know what? There's still time to come. Well, your show on from 3 o'clock, Martin. Looking forward to it.
Yes, good stuff indeed. Well, in other news now, 2 men deny killing a pensioner whose remains were found across Salford.
Yes, the torso of a 67-year-old, Stuart Everett, was discovered by a passerby, wrapped in plastic in a nature reserve.
Now, this led to a huge police search across 16 locations. And joining us now from Manchester Crown Court is our reporter, Sophie Reaper. Sophie, please tell us more.
Well, both defendants appeared here at Manchester Crown Court this morning, sat in the dock either side of their translator as they appeared for their plea hearing. Martin Polchowski, aged 68, and Mikhail Majurkovic, aged 42, standing charged with 2 counts, 1 of murder, 1 of manslaughter, both relating to the death of 67-year-old Stuart Everett. Now, they stood one after the other in the dock as the court asked whether they pleaded guilty or not guilty, both of which replied that they were not guilty on both counts. Now, as you say, the investigation into this case began after a passerby happened to spot a human torso wrapped in plastic in the Kersaldale Nature Reserve in Salford. That was in April earlier this year. That launched a huge investigation which found multiple other body parts across the city, and using DNA analysis, it determined that those body parts belonged to Stuart Stuart Everett. Now, shortly after this, the two men, Polchowski and Miyurkovic, were arrested and charged with those 2 counts. And following today's proceedings, the judge in this case, John Potter, told the 2 defendants that they would now be remanded in custody until the time of their trial next March.
Well, Sophie Reaper, thank you so much for bringing us that. What a shocking case.
Yes, well, coming up, yet another scandal for Strictly Come Dancing. This is a 3rd dancer now comes under the spotlight for inappropriate behaviour whilst on the show. What on earth is going on?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined now by Stefan Kyriasis to give us the latest on everything theatre.
So, yeah, we're going in first with Starlight Express, which is back. It's not in the West End. It's out at Wembley at the Troubadour Theatre, which is a big, almost kind of warehouse space, which suits because, as you know, have you seen the show?
Starlight Express was my first ever musical. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. I only saw it once, but I remember it being magical.
Well, this one, it's 1984 it started, and it's still running in Bochum in Germany in a huge arena. So basically what we've got, they've slightly tweaked it, and it's a little boy or little girl, depending on the cast, going to bed, obsessed with toy trains and dreaming of trains. Everybody is dressed up. To me, it looks like a cross between Tron and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I don't really think any of them look remotely like a train, but hey, the songs are Andrew Lloyd Webber. It's pop mixed with kind of cod 1950s rock and roll, some power ballads. The lyrics are politely like something out of an old speak and spell machine or something. You know, he's a steam train, they're out of date, he's being bullied by the diesel and the electric, and he falls for this carriage, the first-class carriage, new girl Pearl, and he wants to impress us, who enters a race, and that's pretty much it. And when the races happen, all these barriers come up around where we're sitting, the lights are flashing, the music's thumping. It's utterly ridiculous, and I felt like a kind of teenager that was huffing sherbet dib-dabs off a giant block of sugar. It's so much fun, and the really crucial thing about it all is that somehow, in the middle of all of that, I just felt myself getting into the story. And when Pearl and Rusty have their little duet, I was very moved, and there's this big starlight sequence, which is the inspiration, the magical starlight that he's seeking. It's beautiful.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions.
That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return.
And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 47 minutes past 2 now, and the Welsh Parliament has come under fire for passing a bill that offers financial assistance schemes to promote diversity in candidates. Charlie Peters is here to tell us about this story. What have you uncovered?
Well, it's called the Elections and Elected Bodies Bill. It only passed last week after its 4th reading, and it's described by the government in Wales as radical and groundbreaking. That's the view of the Council General. Now, it does have quite a few parts to it. The headline that they're pushing is that it'll register up to 400,000 new voters on the electoral register in Wales. But the sections that have skipped quite a lot of attention are that they require ministers to promote diversity in candidates. Now, it's one thing to say that diversity should be achieved in people who are running for office in Wales, but it's the next section that's attracted quite a lot of criticism when we've raised it with some experts and commentators, which is that in Section 28 of this bill, ministers are approved and are allowed to give cash to candidates if they meet a certain set of specified and specific characteristics. However, the Welsh Government haven't told us what those specific or specified characteristics are. When we asked them, could you rule out which characteristics would acquire this cash? Are there any groups that wouldn't get it? They said they wouldn't say at this point.
Not white men, I imagine.
Well, that's one of the identities I put forward to them. They wouldn't comment on that.
It does seem quite interesting that the Welsh administration is saying they're going to give money to certain political candidates, but not other political candidates. I mean, isn't an election supposed to be about electing people rather than ministers decreeing who must be elected?
Yeah, and that's the sort of criticism I heard when I went to the Taxpayers Alliance about this issue yesterday. They told me that it was too much meddling in democracy and that it was a sham bill that was wasting taxpayers' money. In defence, the Welsh Government, a spokesperson, told me last night that it's vital that our elected bodies represent the diversity of people in Wales, and this legislation will pave the way in tackling barriers to participation. They went on, we will set out proposals for what these protected characteristics will be shortly, and these will be developed and consulted upon widely. All regulations will have to be agreed by the Senedd. We will play no part in determining any financial assistance to individual candidates. But again, they wouldn't tell me which characteristics and which criteria would qualify for this funding.
I mean, presumably it will be those with protected characteristics under the Equality Act. I don't know.
But we all have protected characteristics. That's the thing. All of us falls under at least some of those brackets. Every single identity is protected. I mean, everyone sat at this bar right now, we're protected according to our race, our age, our gender, our sex. All that stuff is protected. So the question for the Welsh Government now is, are there subsections of protected characteristics you're going to give this cash to? Are there religious perspectives you want to see more of in Parliament? They should really be able to say which ones they don't want to see more of and which ones they want to see more of, but they aren't. And when you look at the makeup of the Senedd, which is the core part of this, right, the Welsh Assembly, now 5% of Assembly members in Cardiff are from an ethnic minority background versus 5.6% of the wider Welsh population. Is that a significant disparity that requires taxpayers' money to fix? Is it even something that you should try to fix? These are contested political questions, but the Welsh Government's going to put money in their direction.
Oh, dear.
Goodness me.
Governments will...
Taxpayer money to fix elections to make up for a 0.6% difference. I mean, it makes sense to presumably someone somewhere. Charlie Peters, thank you very much for bringing us that story.
Right, well, to finish the show, Strictly Come Dancing is fighting to survive as a third pro dancer is identified as a person of interest in this scandal that's been plaguing the series over the last few months.
Well, in response, the BBC has said it would introduce chaperones in all rehearsals in a bid to ensure welfare needs are met.
Yes, so pro dancers Giovanni Panice and Graziano Di Prima won't be returning to the show following all of these revelations.
Well, joining us now is the showbiz journalist Sarah Louise Robertson, because, Sarah, it seems like Strictly is under fire.
It's under massive fire at the moment. I don't think it's ever come under so much criticism as what it's facing, and it's really all sort of snowballed from this complaint that began at the beginning of the year. The Sherlock star Amanda Abington, she starred on last year's show. She dropped out. There was rumours at the time when she dropped out that she wasn't getting on very well with her Strictly partner, which is Giovanni Pernice, but he obviously has now left. Well, he's been suspended. She went to the BBC with these allegations. They've suspended him. But what has now transpired is another dancer, Graziano Di Prima. He was sacked from this year's lineup after allegations surfaced about his mistreatment of his celebrity partner last year, Zara McDermott. And now we hear there's a third name which hasn't been disclosed yet, which is coming under fire, but they're not, you won't see them in this year's professional lineup. So it's been a past dancer, someone who's danced on the show before, and that's where we are really at the moment. But this is massive for the BBC, because this show really is the jewel in the corporation's crown. It's viewed by millions and millions every Saturday night. It's been one of television's biggest success stories. And it was something that was seen as a family show. I mean, there has been incidents in the past. I don't know if you can remember when there was that comedian, Sean Walsh, Sean spelt with 2 N's, I don't know why. And he was rumoured to have had an affair with his Strictly professional partner, Katya Jones. So there has been these scandals of the Strictly curse, but there's been nothing where it's come to actual physical abuse and mistreatment. And those are very serious allegations that have been made towards the show.
Yes, I mean, it points to maybe a cultural problem at the show if there are not one, not two, but three pro dancers under the spotlight.
But I would just like to come in here with this and raise these points. I'm not saying anything's right or wrong. We don't know yet until we see like a full inquiry, which will happen. But dancing, I don't know if you've ever danced. I have. It's a very, very, very competitive world. People take it really seriously. These are people who have gone into this from children. It's their career, it's their livelihood, and dancing is hard. It's not easy. You have to have discipline. You have to have commitment. And they sometimes do use methods that are unorthodox. I'm not saying they're right, but that does happen.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? None of us were in those rooms. They'll have to find out if actually anything really terrible happened.
Yes,
but yes, thank you very much, Sarah. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm really sorry. Sarah Louise Robertson, showbiz journalist.
Up next, it's Martin Daubney. See you tomorrow at 12.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi again, here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. Temperatures are going to be rising. Plenty of fine weather for many parts of the UK. However, in the northwest, there will still be quite a bit of cloud as we go through the end of the week and further rain to come too. We currently have a weather system which is gradually making its way a little bit further eastwards, but this is going to break up as we go through the day. So a little bit less rain overnight, and any rain over Scotland likely to be confined just to the higher ground, and most other places turning dry. After a warm evening across England and Wales in particular, it is going to be a warm night. Not a huge amount of cloud around, but temperatures not dropping a huge amount. Some places staying with temperatures around 17 or 18 degrees. First thing tomorrow morning, there could be a few pockets of mist and fog around western parts of England and Wales perhaps, but for much of England and Wales it is going to be a fine start. Plenty of sunshine, and with that temperatures are going to start to rise pretty quickly. A cloudier story though across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Perhaps not as cloudy as today, but nonetheless a few spots of rain are possible as we go through the morning. Perhaps the brightest weather will be across more eastern parts of Scotland. A greater chance of seeing some sunshine here. Through the day we are going to see a bit more cloud building across far western parts of Scotland. In the Outer Hebrides, some rain pushing its way in here, and there could be some strong blustery winds to go with it. Elsewhere, and for Scotland, Northern Ireland, a drier day than today and a little bit brighter at times, but the best of the sunshine will be across much of England and Wales, and with that temperatures rising higher than today, highs of around 31 Celsius in the southeast, but everywhere it is going to feel relatively hot. As we go through the evening, we are going to see a bit more cloud and rain feeding into far northwestern parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but staying fine towards the southeast. There will be some wet weather pushing its way through as we go through Saturday and into Sunday, but Saturday could stay hot in the southeast. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
£30,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours. It's our biggest cash prize of the year so far.